Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John DeLynn. It is November 10th, 2021, and we are in part two of an amazing, inspiring, tragic, heartfelt, raw, and inspiring interview with Chandler Roberson. Did I get it right?
You got it right, yes.
Chandler, welcome back to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thank you.
How was lunch?
It's fantastic. Leftover sushi is good. Thanks, Dad.
And for those of you who didn't join us for part one, we are so thrilled. We adore Cara Burrell. She is in like Flynn. And sometimes we want to have other kind of like a bench of co-interviewers like Gerardo. And we're so thrilled to have with us the one, the only Samantha Shelley from Zelf on the Shelf as co-host today.
Yay. I love the bench.
Welcome.
Thank you.
For those who didn't hear the first part, go back, stop, pause, go back and listen to part one. It's really important. But it turns out that Samantha and Chandler were both at BYU-Idaho together in Rexburg, Idaho. And so Samantha's like, John, you got to interview Chandler. And so I'm like, I'm down. And so Samantha, thanks for being here and for bringing us this amazing interview.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to say to our audience?
No, just we're lucky to have Chandler here.
All right. Okay, so for part one, we talked about a bunch of cool stuff. We talked about Chandler growing up in the Sacramento area as a Mormon. We talked about very problematic experiences dating boys and young men within a Mormon context. Really unfortunate interactions with Mormon bishops around the law of chastity. Really unfortunate experiences with a sexual assault and or rape, both as a Mormon teenage girl and at BYU-Idaho, which included Chandler coming home early from her experience at BYU-Idaho, basically feeling afraid to report her sexual assault / rape at BYU-Idaho for fear of getting kicked out. Really hard stuff, reinforcing the need for the Mormon Church to, number one, stop having grown men sitting alone with young girls or boys or young adult girls, men or women, asking sexually explicit stuff, but also how desperately the Mormon Church needs to start talking about consent and healthy sexuality to its children, teens, and young adults. We also talked about Chandler briefly serving a Mormon mission, deciding to come home early, and closing out her time at BYU-Idaho. There were issues around body image and rape culture and modesty and all sorts of cool issues. For all those reasons, go back and watch it. Anything I'm leaving out, Samantha, from part one?
No, I think that was a good summary.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I just want to clarify, I was born in Sacramento and moved to Vancouver, Washington when I was about right. 7 or 8. So okay. I did grow up in Sacramento and have a lot of experiences as a kid.
But that was Vancouver, Washington.
Yeah, Vancouver, Washington as well.
Your high school years?
My middle second grade and on.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. And that's just the beginning, because part two is the stuff that at least Samantha was most excited to talk about.
Because I was there.
She was there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to be talking about you becoming a fashion blogger within the Mormon context.
Yep.
You know, so well known that you ended up on Good Morning America and probably other national media assets or channels. We're going to talk about two Mormon marriages.
Yep.
And faith transition stuff, and probably a lot more cool things. So where does your Mormon story, how does your Mormon story continue, Chandler? What's next in your epic story?
Okay, well, I think we left off about somewhere along BYU-Idaho with kind of the modesty stuff, right? I think so.
Yeah.
You hadn't started your blog yet.
Hadn't started my blog yet. Yes.
But you had met Samantha.
I had met Samantha about this time. So yeah, she was like the cool girl that was friends with my ex-boyfriend at church, and so yeah, so blogs were kind of taking off at this time. There wasn't a ton of them, but there was definitely a presence of Mormon fashion bloggers at the time. And
give us a year. What's an approximate year?
I'm trying to think, like 2013-ish,
okay.
Yeah,
12, 13, 14, okay. So anywhere in there.
All right.
So the presence of Mormon bloggers, fashion bloggers, was just coming out all of a sudden. And they were always gorgeous girls and they always had super expensive, awesome clothes. But not all of them applied the modesty aspect to their clothes, even though you knew they were LDS.
Do either of you remember some of these early bloggers or let's name names if
Amber
we're
Filler
comfortable.
Yep, Cara Loren.
Cara Lauren, Rachel Parcell.
Yep.
Haley Devine, even though she technically wasn't fashion, she
counts
kind
for
of counts.
sure. Yeah.
You mentioned her in the first episode.
Yeah, she's more lifestyle, but she totally does do
Yeah.
fashion stuff as well. Hers is more, yeah. But yeah, those are the big names that I remember, at least the ones that
me
are still
too.
doing it.
Amber
as well.
Filler Up was like
She was everything.
Yeah. And it was also around the time that just, I think, mummy blogging and just sort of blogging in general was taking off in a massive way. And it did seem like Mormon women had the reign with that.
Totally.
There's been like whole deep dives that like
Yeah.
Why that is.
publications.
Yeah. It's because they're so good at sharing exactly what they're doing. So,
And
So they were totally taking off at that time. And I was in Rexburg and no one was doing it yet in Rexburg. And I noticed that and I thought, okay, here's a good opportunity to start a fashion blog and use modesty as my focus. But I had seen other modest fashion blogs. I just didn't think they were my taste necessarily. I thought they were still kind of frumpy. So I was like, I'm going to make this really cute. Like J. Crew was really big at the time. And I was like, I'm going to make this happen, like putting bright colors and things together. So I just started a blog. I just made a WordPress blog. They taught us how to make WordPress blogs in school. So I was like, I'm just going to do that. And it just kind of took off. It was weird to get recognized. It was embarrassing a little bit in public to get recognized when I had it going, but it was also really cool.
Before you say that it took off, describe what it was, what you were doing, what your posts would be like.
Yeah.
And what it was like to try and build a brand or a blog or a readership or a viewership or whatever.
Yeah, I kind of just fell into it. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of copying what I had seen successfully done by some of those bigger bloggers at the time. But I would just put together an outfit. Obviously, you just put together something. And growing up, we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't get really expensive stuff. We just did thrift stores. So I was really good at finding cheaper alternatives to look nice as well. So I would have fun putting together an outfit, and then I would have like a friend go out with me, and it was my boyfriend in the beginning, but I fired him. But they would take pictures of my outfits, and then I would upload it to my blog, Days of Chandler, and I would just tag where I'd got all the stuff, and I would post it on Instagram, and I think hashtags were super helpful back then because that's how I started gaining a following. But yeah, that's kind of the work that went into it. But I just remember feeling really frustrated by garments because even though you would be wearing modest clothes, maybe it was still poking out of like the tops or the sides. So I just would get so frustrated. So once again, I was like, I got to figure out a way to make this not frustrating and cool so that people will want to wear their garments basically. So
it was primarily a blog?
Yeah.
And is it still up if people wanted to check it out?
It's still there. It's probably got a bunch of old stuff now. It hasn't been updated in years and years.
What's the URL?
I literally think you can just search Days of Chandler and it'll be a WordPress blog.
Okay.
It should still come up, but it'll probably be embarrassing.
Was it daysofchandler.com or was it
daysofchandler.com?
.wordpress.com?
Nope, .com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our domain, baby.
Yeah, baby.
We are for sure going to link to that.
Okay, well, good luck. It's probably
That'll
terrifying.
be fun for you, Chandler. Chandler's outfits really were iconic, from my perspective at least.
Describe them.
Well, everyone did modesty very frankly at BYU-Idaho. The Mormon fashion world in general was pretty grim, like the mainstream.
Chevron, maxi skirts.
A lot of chevron, a lot of maxi skirts, a lot of skirt extenders. I had a skirt extender phase that was upsetting. I just remember thinking your outfits are iconic and I wanted to emulate them so badly.
So
like the way you would put colors together in ways that like I hadn't really seen other people doing. Maybe you were more immersed in the online blogging world, so to you it felt like you were copying others. I don't know. But to me it was like, no one's doing this around here.
Well, and I definitely tried to add my own taste into the outfits. Like I watched what they were doing, but I would also look a lot on Pinterest because that was big at the time and just try to put my own spin on things. So I did feel like I was making it unique, but learning my best from the people that were being successful was really helpful to me too.
And I feel like you were able to incorporate like mainstream, like more like runway fashion of the time, or like what was actually trendy outside of the Mormon bubble, which is like 10 years behind into your modesty outfits. And it would be stuff that you wouldn't necessarily look at and be like, that girl is trying to be modest. It would be stuff that I felt like was, at least for the time, like independently stylish.
Yeah, no, that's accurate.
So for our non-Mormon viewers and listeners, and for the history's sake, describe what it meant in 2012 to be modest as a Mormon woman. And what the complications were there.
Yeah, so covering your knees, like anything would cover your knees unless obviously you're swimming. So covering your knee, skirts, everything down to your knees. Like cap sleeve shirts or longer, nothing like no tank tops, nothing low cut in the front or the back, no midriff, so no crop tops or anything like that. Nothing too tight fitting also, like nothing that's super tight. I don't know, am I missing anything?
And does this make it hard to look good, basically?
Oh my gosh, yeah. You have not much to work with.
I feel like a lot of us pushed the tightness thing. That was our way that we got around it.
That was the only thing. And depending on your body type, if you're wearing something tight, someone can perceive it as being inappropriate or not. So it becomes this confusing balance that you have to find. But yeah, so really what you have to work with is patterns and like graphic tees and accessories. Like you don't get a whole lot to work with.
And so I guess it would make sense why at least Mormon women would be really interested in this, because it's like, how do I look good? Like society's got all these standards for what it means to look fashionable or cool or good. And then that's hard enough. And then you've got all this more, and part of this, we should probably make explicit. We talked about this a bit. You would have, because you would have already served a mission, you would be wearing Mormon garments, which have this weird sleeve with women. Do you want to describe the garment sleeve for women?
Yeah,
or just garments. Explain garments and garments for Mormon women, and why, and then how that relates to clothes, if you want to.
Garments,
or Samantha can.
I'm thinking, so garments for Mormon women, I mean, it's two pieces, and it's basically like a shirt, a pretty high cut shirt with a little bit of a cap sleeve. It goes almost like a t-shirt.
What's a cap sleeve?
It's just sort of like a t-shirt. It's,
I know, but I want the audience
covers the shoulders.
Yeah, it covers the shoulders.
The most sensual part of the body.
Yep. It's high in the back. It's low. And then the bottoms are like briefs almost.
Like biker shorts, right?
Yeah, biker shorts. Yeah.
That's the best kind of the ones that are like biker shorts.
Yeah, the ones
There's
that are like
a whole
tight.
array of worse styles.
But yeah, and then they go all the way to your knees. There was one type that you could get and it would be a little bit higher, but it was also seen as kind of
Karenessa, get the petites,
naughty.
even though you're 5'9".
Yeah, exactly.
Margie always got the petites.
Yeah, didn't we all? I feel like that was the hack. So yeah.
And then again, this is garment culture, Mormon garment culture. This is almost like non-Mormon porn. They're like, tell me about the secret underwear.
Just quirky things.
Yep.
But like, if you walk around Provo or anywhere, at least when I was growing up, you would always have this issue of like trying to wear normal clothes. So like men, when I would wear shorts, number one, I would always have to buy super long shorts.
Oh yeah.
And then no matter what, it didn't matter if I ever sat down or like, if my shorts got hiked up for whatever reason, you'd always see Mormon men or women with the garments poking out of their shorts and or their skirt. And so you either had to hike up the garments or roll them up at the top or whatever. But it's also kind of really awkward because a lot of times people just didn't bother. And then you're just seeing these weird underwear things poking out of people's shorts and skirts. Am I?
Yeah, totally. And depending on who you are, some people thought it was super naughty if you had stuff hanging out. Like if your stuff was showing and you weren't tucking it, that could be seen as not the right thing to do. But also some people just didn't care. So there's definitely a range.
Also, men could have men always have their garment top showing.
Like the neckline.
Because it just passes as an undershirt. But if you saw a woman's undershirt, that would
what would happen?
Well, it's just more of a faux pas socially.
What would they say something or?
What is that phrase? There's like a phrase for it. Your testimony's showing or something. There's like a weird phrase.
That's it. That's the phrase.
Okay, yeah. But I remember thinking that's strange. It's my underwear. You wouldn't point that out to anyone else for any other type of underwear. So.
And then there's always the issue of Mormons. It's a way Mormons can know whether even your parents or your siblings can know,
Oh, yeah.
are you staying faithful or not?
Yep.
They would, what would they do?
I mean, they would ask you why you're not wearing your garments, right? They already know that you're not.
Well, before that, they would look. So
Oh.
like there are ways to know whether someone's wearing their garments or not, right?
Right.
How would you
I
know?
mean, if you're wearing clothes that are not modest, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Or you can also tell even if you are wearing modest clothes.
I mean,
is
yeah,
that
they
right?
could be peeking out. You could see the little symbols.
Oh, I guess that's true.
Depending on if you do bra over or bra under, that's a whole
Okay,
other
so that,
discussion.
what about that? Is
Yeah.
it bra over, bra under?
Depending if you're super by the rules, it's supposed to be the garments like closest to your body, so everything should be over the top of
Did
it,
you do that?
basically. I did do it, yeah.
So faithful.
So explain why that's weird for a woman, for men who have no idea what it's like
I
to wear
mean,
a bra,
it's-
let alone a t-shirt under a bra.
I mean, yeah, it is exactly how it's described. It just doesn't look or feel
Shirt
normal.
inside the bra with you.
Yeah, and I feel like when you're a guy and you're getting garments, obviously they're going to be frustrating still, but like as a girl, going from wearing like 2 very small pieces of underwear to 2 huge, most of your body pieces of underwear, as to where guys go from wearing undershirts and boxers. It's not a huge adjustment as it is for most women, I would say. So it's just, yeah, it's super frustrating. And everyone knows, like you said, if you're not wearing them, people always have to make the little remark like, oh, I was at the gym, that's why I'm not wearing mine. So people don't judge them if they're not wearing their garments. It's definitely a way for people to check each other.
And wouldn't you get comments on your blog if
Oh, yeah.
even when you were, just people suspicious that you weren't wearing your garments?
All the time. Like garments, question mark.
That's something that people feel is appropriate.
Yeah, very regular.
So in the Mormon culture, a young woman having a blog who's fashionable, saying, here's how to try and look semi-fashionable and decent with these lame, goofy garments underneath.
Yeah.
I can imagine that you would have a built-in high-demand audience right from the start, right?
Huge. Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize at the time that it was as big as it was, but yeah, there were tons of girls. I would get messages from moms. I would get messages from people all the time. Thank you so much. This helps. I just don't feel like I have to spend as much time being frustrated about wearing garments, or I'm not as scared about having to get garments now because it looks not so, like it's more fun. You can still be cool, because that was a lot of my thing too, was, oh, you can blog and be religious and it can be acceptable in the world. Like that was my push for sure. So yeah, people were all about it, and I felt really good because I was doing the exact thing that I hoped I could do, that I wasn't doing on my mission. So it felt really good, but a lot of pressure.
So how are you doing this and going to school? Did you stop school? Was this a job? Were you just doing this part-time?
I was just doing it on the side. Yeah, I was just after school, or the days that I didn't have classes quite as much, I would just put together the outfit and go outside and, like I said, have somebody take pictures. So it's kind of a quick thing, and I would stay up a lot of nights just posting stuff and putting things together and looking at Instagram. So I just did it on top of school.
So the platforms were WordPress, Instagram.
Instagram. I did a bit on Facebook, but that was kind of all there was at the time.
Okay.
So.
And did you quickly try and monetize or not, or get sponsors, or?
Honestly, when I got into it, I didn't even know you could make money. I thought it was just a fun thing people did. So when I learned that most bloggers were making money, it was surprising to me, and it was intimidating. But in the beginning, it was mostly just collaborations with other brands. A lot of modest clothing brands or local companies would want me to come pick out a few pieces and like style them somehow and then post about it. So it was mostly collaborations. And
what would you get out of that?
well, I would get free clothes, but it felt kind of disingenuous because a lot of the time it wasn't stuff I would necessarily want, but it seemed like a good opportunity. So I was like, I'm just going to style this for them so that even if it's somebody else's style, they could find something. So I got a little bit lost once there was collaboration stuff involved. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And it was such a new space. I feel like now people have more of a general idea of how sponsorships and stuff work, but we really didn't know that stuff back then.
No, I was so new to it. I mean, I had offers to do paid stuff, but I think I just felt like I didn't want to take the money because I wanted to do it because I enjoyed doing it. So it was a very weird thing.
You didn't want to sell out.
I didn't want to sell out. Yeah, I didn't want to be one of those people. I mean, I kind of did by doing collaborations with brands, but yeah.
Okay, so what happens next in the story?
Oh, good question. So I was doing the Modest Fashion blog, and I didn't finish my degree at BYU-Idaho, but I was just feeling a lot of burnout just dating there and kind of the culture. And And I was loving doing my fashion blog. I'm trying to make sure I'm not skipping any BYU-Idaho stuff before I go on, but that seems accurate. So, okay, yeah. So basically, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next, and I kept thinking...
Wait, I could just say you had dating and sexism, meeting your best friend, sexual assault, and then some conflict about church stuff.
Yeah, that sounds right still.
Okay. So then we're going to moving to Utah, culture shock.
Yep.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, so, yeah, I had...
Nannying.
Yep. Oh, yeah, nannying.
And then meeting your husband, yeah.
Yeah, so I just figured Utah seemed like the next best thing to do because it was a bunch of Mormons and that's where all the big fashion bloggers were. So I figured I better just go there. And I had a couple of friends here. So it just made sense to just move out here and pursue fashion blogging and just get a job and see what would happen. So
and if you're in Rexburg, moving to Salt Lake is like moving to the big city.
Oh, yeah. It felt so exciting. I honestly, the first time I came to Utah was somewhere during my first year of college, and everyone was so shocked. They're like, you can't be Mormon if you've never been to Utah, which was like, well, I think there's a lot of people that haven't been there. But anyway, so my first time to Utah, I just really loved it, and I thought it would be a really cool place to live. So then I ended up here.
Okay.
But yeah, it was quickly, as soon as I got here, I still was doing my fashion blog, and I started to do more collaboration with other bloggers and go to events with other big Utah bloggers. And it just, I think it lost a bit of its magic pretty quickly because I started to see these girls that, I don't want to name names, but I started to see girls that had really solid online personalities that I really admired or look up to. I'd meet them in person and they were terrible, or they were just not nice, or just not the person that I thought they were. And I started to learn that pretty much all the collaborations they were doing were not brands that they would support or agree with. They were just doing it for the money. So it just all of a sudden felt like a really fake industry to be in. It seemed really exciting before, and then I got here and it was kind of like a bubble burst. I was just like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. Blogging is kind of terrifying. So anyway, so I kept doing it, but I kind of slowed down once I got here. And I got into nannying when I was here, but before...
So would you have already been on Good Morning America by this point, or?
Well, so I wasn't on the show, but they featured a bunch of my outfits and like pictures, and they linked to my blog basically.
Where
this was right before I came to Utah.
Okay, so talk about getting that big and what that was like.
Honestly, I didn't even it was a really cool experience, but I still didn't feel like I was a big deal. Like if somebody ran into me and was telling me, "Oh, I follow your blog and I love your blog," I would feel so embarrassed. Like I don't know why. I just felt like, why would they want to follow me, or why would they want to do what I'm doing? That doesn't make any sense. So it just always felt like imposter syndrome. I knew that I was on that show, Good Morning America, and it just felt like I got lucky, I guess. I didn't feel like proud of myself.
I would just assume everyone who made it at that level in terms of exposure would be making six figures, just totally raking.
Not back then. Then it was just different, I guess. I don't know. I was so small that I don't think they would have had to offer me any, I mean, in comparison to other people that were doing huge brands and stuff like that. I just don't think I was big enough compared to some of the other ones for them to have paid me for anything.
Any idea how many viewers or, followers or whatever?
I knew at one time, and I don't even know if I could remember.
Tens of thousands, hundreds?
Oh yeah, definitely. Tens, hundreds at one point for sure.
And how often were you getting recognized?
In Rexburg, it got to a point where it was maybe every other time I was going somewhere, which felt super surreal. And then when I moved to Utah, I was getting recognized, which also felt weird because Utah's so much bigger. So it was a really cool experience though to meet people in person and feel like I was doing something bigger, than I expected that I could do. So it was kind of cool to have my own thing. I was just proud of myself that I was doing something, because I feel like as a Mormon woman, you kind of see yourself, and I think this is probably why a lot of Mormon women get into MLMs, but you just see yourself as everything's happening and you're just background noise or not doing anything. So it just kind of gave me a little bit of confidence that I could do something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said you started nannying.
Yeah. So I started nannying, and that was also a very interesting culture shock, just seeing kind of how Utah families run. It's also a very stressful position to be in. I've nannied for a couple of pretty big Utah mommy bloggers, and I also won't get into their names, but it was a huge learning experience, just how Utah families function. But I did meet my first husband, who's now ex-husband, but I met him mid-nannying for one of those jobs. I think I had only been in Utah for 4 or 5 months at the time.
My kids have done nannying, and it's hard.
Yeah, it's so hard.
Brutal.
It's decent money,
even if
but
you love the family. It's hard.
Oh yeah, exactly. Because you love them so much that you almost give way too much of yourself, and then if anything goes wrong, you just once again you kind of blame yourself and you feel really bad, and yeah, it's just stressful. So it was great, but I would never do nannying again.
And you're seeing all sorts of stuff you probably shouldn't see, and you're seeing all the dark skeletons of people's closets.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are confiding in you things that you may not be old enough to or really want to be, dealing with. And
yeah, I would have conversations with one of my bosses about some of her issues with the church, and it was kind of during the time that it came out that people who had gay parents couldn't be baptized. That all happened about
2015.
Mm-hmm. So I was working for one of my bosses, and she confided in me that, that was really troublesome for her and she was having a hard time with it. And that was like really cool for me to have that experience, to get to communicate that I also was struggling with that with someone that I really respected. So there were moments that it was really nice, but then it would be like the next day, it wouldn't be a problem for her anymore or something. Or she would have talked to her husband and she was like, I guess we just can't understand all things, and I'd be like, oh, so I never really knew where I stood. I was like, are we on the same page or? Yeah.
What can you say? So I don't know I don't think I've ever really met like full-time influencers, but I see these people where they're like on vacation and they're like filming everything, or they're, making toast for their kids and they're doing selfies or whatever. Like, but I'm imagining behind the scenes, like parents snipping at each other, or like, being kids misbehaving, and like, of course, one of the downsides of social media is that it portrays an ideal and people's lives are messy.
Yes.
But I imagine that in this influencer world, it can even be worse, because just the pressure, and there's got to be a level of intensity where it's just, it's like a double mess.
Oh, for sure.
Without like throwing shade or like trying to like single anyone out.
Yeah.
Can you give us just a sense for what it's like behind the scenes with these types of families?
It is chaos. I mean, you like love it some days, and some days you're just ready to give it up, but it's chaos. Like, that's the best way I can describe it, because they're kind of the face of their brand, which is the way it works, I guess. And then you're just the assistant or the nanny or whatever they want you to be. And you're making kind of all the stuff happen, but you watch their stories or you watch their posts and you're nowhere to be seen. You're nowhere credited. And it's like they just convince everyone that they're this magic person that can accomplish everything with no help. And you feel bad, like you're being complicit in this idea where people think, well, so-and-so can do it. How come I can't do it? And you start to see that and you feel pretty guilty, because you're like, oh my gosh, if only they knew how go it was for me running errands and redoing rooms and watching kids and running them to places. And I'm exhausted taking, 5 kids to Costco or whatever it is, and grocery shopping, making meals. And you're like, yeah, of course your life is good and happy because you have somebody helping you. But no one likes to really acknowledge that they have help or nannies or anything, which is interesting.
As if Mormon women needed more standards to live up to. Yes. They're impossible.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much stress. And that's a hard thing about being a Mormon woman, is Mormon women do a lot of problematic things, but there's a pressure on Mormon women to do those things. And so you want to be mad at them, but you're like, you're just part of this system that tells you what to want and how to feel and how to exist. So it's an impossible situation for everybody.
Yeah. And I really see like the Mormon mummy blogging world, like there's just so much untapped creativity and even like professional energy among Mormon women that they don't get to explore. And so you mentioned MLMs, but I also just feel like blogging and social media is like one way they can channel that. And they didn't necessarily, it makes sense why they jumped on board with that so much.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I resonate with that for sure. It just gives you an outlet to be creative and good at what you're doing that's not outside the home. So.
Yeah. For Mormon moms that wanted to be a little bit more than just a mom, and I don't mean just a mom like I think it's just a mom. I think it's probably one of the hardest jobs I've ever seen. Yeah. But for someone who needed or wanted something more, it's a way to do that that's socially acceptable. Let me ask you really quickly. There's also that additional layer of trying to appear Mormon.
Oh, yeah.
And no Mormons are perfectly Mormon, but I imagine you also got to see people who maybe weren't always living up to the standards of the church, but wanted to project the image that they were, or that they were Orthodox when they really weren't. Anything worth talking about there? Or is...
I'm trying to think for me. I mean, the first family that I worked for that I'm thinking of, they were super firm believers. And I would say they were pretty much exactly how they were, and they're perceived exactly how they are. So I don't really think I saw that too much with them. But the other family that I work for, I know that they had a lot of issues, but it was kind of encouraging the idea that they were still believing. So, but I understand that pressure all at the same time too.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
You don't want to, like when I had my blog and I wanted to stop doing the modesty thing, there's a huge pressure because you realize you're about to lose what you've worked really hard to gain. So you want to hang on to it just a little bit longer. It's a tough position.
Totally.
And people feel so entitled to, I mean, answers about your underwear and just like to you continuing to be this thing that they have identified with.
Yeah.
Okay, so you did the mommy blog, nanny stint.
Yes.
And that's a really common thing, by the way, within Mormonism generally. Just, especially if a Mormon young woman doesn't want to go to college or doesn't really think there's a career in store, it's a way to make some money and bide some time until the Mormon man falls in your lap, right?
Yep. And honestly, I nannied so many different types of families, like huge families, small families, different age groups. And I think for Mormon women, at least for me, it felt like a good way to get experience in being a mom too, because you're working, but you're also learning how to do the Mormon mom thing. And I think for most people that probably works in their favor. They enjoy it. They see all the benefits of it. But I think it had an opposite effect on me where I saw how much work goes into being a mom and all the stress and how little time you have for yourself. And so I think it really was what put pause for me on how, you want to, Mormon women are encouraged to have kids as soon as they can, as soon as you're married. And it scared me because I spent so much time nannying. I was like, I don't think most people realize what a commitment this is to rush into that.
Yeah.
So
Can backfire.
yes.
All right. So where does your story go there?
So I'm nannying and then I meet my first husband and we were both pretty young. We were 22. Each of us were both 22 and he was wonderful. I have nothing but good things to say about him. We were just really young and we actually met when I was nannying for one of those huge families and they all loved him and he would come over. But they were also very strict about the rules about us spending time together. So if he was to come over and, because I also lived at this family's house. So basically he would come over and they would remind me he cannot stay the night. Even if it's on the couch, he needs to leave. That's the rules. So I was living at this place where I had rules of a, teenager. As an adult, I was 22. So we had this kind of a interesting relationship period where it just felt like we were kids. And then we we knew each other for about a year before we got married. But it was when I was working for this family that I actually found out that Sam and Tanner had left the church.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you mentioned the 2015 policy and we were already pretty open about having left before that.
Yeah. So I was working for this family and I remember when I was working for them, I thought to myself, oh, my testimony is so strong. Nothing could ever hurt my testimony at this point. And then I saw that Sam and Tanner had left and Sam and Tanner, at least how I saw it at BYU-Idaho, were just the representatives of good Mormons, the cool Mormons. They were the faithful Mormons. And I just admired both of them a lot. And I think most of us, our testimonies are somewhere in other people as well. And so when they left, it was just one of the darkest days that I'd had so far because it was just they're so intelligent. If they left, what could be wrong? What do they know that I don't know? And I don't exactly remember if I messaged or if I just saw that you guys had posted about the CES letter, but...
How did you find out they had stopped believing?
I think you guys posted something.
We were both pretty public about it right away, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that before your Mormon Stories interview?
Yes,
Yeah,
well, especially because we both did Mormon blogging and I think we were both sort of workshopping our faith crises somewhat publicly. I mean, obviously it's only tip of the iceberg is being shown on social media, but still...
Yeah.
We were both back then very of the persuasion, like we're going to write a massive thing. So yeah, we wanted people to know. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you guys did. But yeah, so I think it might have been on Facebook or something, but I saw it, and then I saw something about the CES letter, and me thinking, oh, well, if there's problems here, I better figure out what they are so that I can help other people if they're having problems, because it's not going to go away. And so I had gotten off work for that day, and I went in my room, and I locked the door, and I just read the CES letter as much as I could. And it was a lot, obviously. The CES letter is a long read. So I read as much as I could, and I just felt sick. I felt so sick. I was so scared, and I was just thinking, what am I going to do? Because even in that moment, I hadn't accepted that it wasn't true, but I was starting to think, what if it's not true? For the first time in my life, I'm 22, and I'm thinking, what if this is a lie?
So I love to slow down during this part because so many people who are listening, first of all, CES Letter is a letter to a CES director written by a friend of mine named Jeremy Runnels, who had a bunch of doubts and questions, and he wrote a church educator to try and get answers, and he never even got a response. And so he shared his letter at cesletter.org, and it has been responsible for hundreds of thousands of Mormons learning the truth about Mormon church history and doctrine and theology, because none of us were taught so many important basic things about our own religion, even if we were sixth-generation Mormons, until either we learned it from books or podcasts before CES Letter, or CES Letter once it came out, or other types of things. All the truth of our troubling church history was kept from all of us. So that's what CES Letter is. Go to cesletter.org, pause this, go read the whole thing, then come back and continue this interview. I'm just kidding. It's 70 pages long.
Yeah, it's long.
But I want to slow down. Can you tell us any of the things you read in the CES Letter that you remember?
So,
just to give people an idea of what things you learned and what things troubled you.
Yeah, it feels in a way like such a blur, because it was such a traumatic feeling moment. Just to have everything kind of the rugs just taken out from under you. But I do remember the things that shocked me initially were the similarities between the Book of Mormon and is it the View of the Hebrews?
Yep.
That was really disturbing to me.
Basically suggesting that the Book of Mormon the ideas for the Book of Mormon could have been kind of plagiarized from another book.
Yes.
The core narrative structure seems to have been borrowed from a book that both Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith had full access to.
Yep.
And others.
And others,
Other books too, yeah.
Yeah. So that one was huge to me. And then about the Abraham...
Book of Abraham?
Book of Abraham.
What about
it? Just that it wasn't even the text that Joseph Smith said that he translated. It was completely unrelated.
For those who don't know what she's talking about, basically... supposedly, Joseph Smith bought some mummy scrolls from Egypt. There's a whole amazing series on Mormon stories by Dr. Robert Rittner, an Egyptologist. But basically, Joseph Smith bought a bunch of scrolls from mummies, claimed to have translated them into what now is called the Book of Abraham within Mormon scripture.
Yep.
But that was all before the Rosetta Stone had been really translated and available to Egyptian scholars to study.
Yep.
So once Egyptian scholars actually translated the scroll, the word Abraham didn't even appear, and they were totally, written in the wrong time period.
Yeah.
And so deeply troubling. Okay.
Super troubling.
Yeah. So that bothered you?
So that was tough. And I'm trying to remember now, but those were two huge ones. Polygamy had always been in the back of my head, especially since that first video that I'd seen that my ex-boyfriend's friend had sent me. But they really broke it down in the CES letter, if I'm remembering right, and it just did not sit well with me. I mean, I'd heard about polygamy, but I wasn't aware about Joseph Smith's wives being as young as 14. That was super upsetting because, I don't know, and I don't mean to backtrack again, but when I came home from my mission, my parents were like, hey, we need to watch this documentary. It's so good. It's called Going Clear. And
on Scientology.
Yeah. And my parents love documentaries. And so it was like, awesome, let's watch this. And I remember watching it and I'm so grateful for that documentary because it was one of those moments where I started to see like, oh, well, I'm glad we don't do that thing at least. And then in the back of my head, I'd think, well, we kind of do that. And then I'd see another thing and think, oh, I'm glad we don't do that. but we kind of do that. And so I would look at other cults or religions and see the problems that they had, like similar things, but I would be able to separate them and say, well, ours was for a good reason, or ours was this. And so seeing the CES letter kind of took away those like hopes or ability to dismiss something and say, no, these things actually happened and this is an issue. And I couldn't just deny that the things hadn't happened anymore, or I couldn't pretend that the story that I thought was true anymore, because same with learning that Joseph Smith used a rock and a hat to translate the Book of Mormon. That was not what I memorized on my mission. That's not what I taught people on my mission. And that was
What were you taught?
That he went out, he had questions, he went out into the grove of trees and he prayed, and that he was overcome with darkness, which was Satan, and then all of a sudden there was two beings, and it was God and Jesus, and they told him not to, go to any of the churches or whatever, and then he had, sorry, I'm going off a tangent now because I'm just...
No, so the rock and the hat is how you were told he had...
So I was... Yeah.
Go ahead.
So after that, he kind of fast forward, and then I was told that he was taking the gold plates that he found after that, and he was basically through the...
Tell me if I'm right, that Angel Moroni had given him these magic spectacles that were ancient, called the Urim and Thummim.
That's right.
And that he would have the plates on a table and then use these magic spectacles that were somehow Old Testament ancient. And he would use those to translate the Book of Mormon gold plates from, quote, Reformed Egyptian into English. Is that what you were taught?
Yeah, no, that's right.
Okay, that's what you were taught. And that's what you taught people on your mission.
Yes.
And then what did you actually find out for the CES letter?
Yeah, that he was using his seer stone that he had used to basically rip people off previously with, and, looking in the hat with the stone and being able to translate or see the words through that instead. And that just...
And the plates weren't in the room.
The plates weren't in the room, which kind of makes it confusing of why did all the stuff have to happen for them to get the plates in the first place? Then why did Laban's head have to be cut off? And why did all these things happen if the plates weren't even really part of the whole thing? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So that was just frustrating because everyone would say, Joseph Smith, if you can disprove Joseph Smith, basically, then the whole thing's a sham, but you can't disprove Joseph Smith. And I'd always kind of felt like that was true until I read the CES letter, and then I was like, oh, so the whole thing kind of just fell through.
It does such a good job, the CES letter. The well has been so poisoned by believers around the CES letter. It's one of my biggest frustrations, because the CES letter is great. And also Jeremy and others are like constantly working to update it. So if there are any like things that are slightly off, it gets edited. But yeah, it's such a fantastic overview. And it really shows you how there's like no piece you can really cling to, because even like pieces you hadn't even thought of, there's like something in it that just shows it's all complete bullshit.
Yeah.
So it's like so much, I feel
that's
like...
Samantha's opinion.
So much of Mormonism and people maintaining belief in Mormonism, despite the fact that evidence abounds that it's false, is...
in Samantha's opinion.
In my tiny-brained opinion, is you encounter these issues, and then if you can keep those issues kind of isolated enough from each other, then, Mormons can just have these justifications for each of them in your mind. And what's really fatal is when you start to build a holistic picture of all the issues and how like there is no chess move that like makes this all work, because it's like one justification that you use for that, well then that is like completely doesn't work here. And I feel like the CES letter does a good job at painting that more holistic picture of all the issues.
Yeah. And I think with the CES letter, it was kind of like you were saying originally, you're not taught any of this, like a lot of these things. No one's telling you the troublesome history or aspects to the church. It's actually told that it's anti-material, and if you seek it out, you're going to lose your testimony, and that's on you. So no one ever had presented these ideas to me before. So it was weird at 22 being presented all this information that felt withheld from me. So I think that was maybe the most like jarring part of reading the CES letter, was just, why had I never heard of any of this stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's the shock of learning all the troubling history. including the anachronisms in the Book of Mormon.
Yes,
Why are there
that's
horses
huge.
when horses weren't in Mesoamerica during that time? And
That also.
steel and swords and wheels, all those things in the Book of Mormon that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Wheat and barley and but yeah. So there's learning all the troubling information, but then the bigger concern for many people is, why was this withheld from me?
Yeah.
And why is the church misled me and sent me on a mission to teach people things that weren't true?
And you've already committed so much of yourself to them under a certain premise. And so it's like, why did I not get to find out everything before I promised those things or made these covenants or whatever it is? It just felt intentional. So that was upsetting.
Yeah. And the Mormon church has been objectively dishonest and intentionally has hid this information from its members for over 150 years.
Yeah.
In one way or another. And, in Mormon stories, our goal is never to actually take people out of the church, but we do believe very strongly in informed consent. Mm-hmm. So the reason why I take this time to drill down is because if I had a magic wand, every Mormon or every Mormon investigator would know all the truth about the church's history and its truth claims, so they could make an informed decision about how much money to give the church, whether to give your life to the church, whether to serve a mission. And then if people choose, well, that's on them.
Then it was a real choice.
So it's a real choice.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So it's just frustrating thinking about that time. But I just remember feeling so panicked in a way that I'd never felt before, because I felt like I was finally losing something that I could make excuses for in the past, like we were saying. And so I called my dad again, and I remember just saying, hey, have you ever heard of the CES letter, and have you read it? And he told me that he's read some of it, and he was able to give me some answers. But like for the first time with my dad, who I always trusted, he gave me answers, but they just didn't make me feel any better, because you can't really, with the, horses and all that, you can't really make a good argument for why that is. I think that maybe it was on this show, but somebody had said it was kind of like saying Abraham Lincoln had a cell phone. Like there's no excuse for those types of things. Mm-hmm. So I just had this despair, and with my ex-husband, we were engaged at the time when I was going through this. So it was full panic because, you're getting interviewed to go through the temple, and you're about to have this the highest ordinance that you can have basically as a Mormon woman. So there was just a lot of pressure to figure it out.
How much were you telling him about this stuff that you'd encountered?
Nothing. Yeah. Didn't tell him anything, because I didn't want to make him uncomfortable. And I was really hoping that I was going to make it work. I don't know if you remember, but I wrote an article.
Yes. Yep. I remember it vividly.
And it went near viral, mm-hmm. and now I hid it, and so embarrassing. But it was just why I chose to believe. And,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes science is wrong, and we can all choose to believe. And that was kind of my hope, is that I could just get past it by choosing to believe. And I think that's the take a lot of people go with until they accept it is what it is.
Is that article still up? Because I want to link to it. You took it down?
It's gone. Yeah, it's long gone, but it was pretty big at the time. I got a lot of feedback from Mormons and ex-Mormons.
Good feedback? Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
sorry. I'm just so excited about that you've brought up this article, because as soon as me and Tana saw that you'd posted that article, I was like, she's having a faith crisis. And it was a thing, especially at the time, for people with blogs. I guess it still is, and now people do it in Instagrams. Mm-hmm. You can always tell that someone's going through a faith crisis. And having gone through it myself, it felt so familiar, where you're at that point where you're like, okay, this really isn't adding up. I know too much, but I'm also, my identity and my perceived psychological safety is too wrapped up in the church yet to leave. It's like the reading it, I was like, this is like the most familiar limbo. Mm-hmm. And I know that feeling of like so desperately trying to stay and asserting it publicly.
Yeah.
I mean, it must be, I'm sure you could like study it, and it must be like for a purpose, because it feels like everyone does it when they're going through a faith crisis. They will start. Even these days, I still see Instagram posts from people that will be like, even though we don't know all the answers, and they're that, I feel like you can spot a faith crisis a mile off by that kind of content.
And it's like bearing your testimony. You're like, if I can say that I believe this, I can convince everyone and myself, and it's all going to be good. But I even remember you sending me a message at the time, and you were like, hey, I know what you're going through. And I was like, she doesn't know. And then you did, though.
I think we weren't that close at that point. I think we I don't even remember the series of events, but I don't know if we were super close. But reading it, I was like, I'm just going to message her anyway because I just feel like she's going to leave.
It was good that you did. So.
And I think some people can maybe get to that point and then just be so terrified of leaving that they never do. But I always felt like you had big dreams and you seemed like someone that would leave.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. But
then you got married in the temple, right?
I did. Yeah. So we got married in the temple.
Okay, wait. So you lost your faith and then got married in the temple.
Well, so I would say I was like 80% out, 20% still believing.
Really quick, I have to ask you. So you had like 3 or 4 major moments of disappointment where the church and or Heavenly Father just really failed you in one regard or another.
Yes.
So I would wonder how reading the CES letter and then losing almost all your faith, that combined with those many moments of disappointment, what that would have been like for you.
Yeah, it was just a great sense of loss. I felt really confused because it was either everything wasn't true and at least there wasn't a God abandoning me, or it was true and it was terrible. So I was like having to look at 2 kind of scary options. But I still hoped, like I was still at the point where I was hoping it was real because at least I knew I would be with my family forever. And I think that's the thing that kept me believing, is just not having to accept that life ends after death. That was scary for me.
Because the Mormon Church teaches that the only way to be with your family in heaven is if you have a Mormon marriage.
Yes.
And you're sealed to your Mormon parents and your parents and your siblings and your children and your spouse all remain faithful Mormons. And so it's sold as this beautiful, positive advantage that if you're Mormon, you get to be with your family forever until you realize that's manufactured scarcity because so many other religions are just like, nope, everybody gets to be together in heaven.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a nightmare, this super tragic, sad heaven where you feel chained to the church, even if you don't necessarily believe it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're destroying your eternal family and disappointing all your believing family and friends.
Exactly.
Did I get that right?
Yep, exactly right.
It's like the fear is the thing that lives the longest in your brain.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it totally is.
Just a question. Did you, because I remember that period of my faith crisis, just feeling like I was going insane. Like, psychologically unwell.
Oh my gosh.
Demons might come and visit me. Like, tell me about like your general day-to-day mood while going through all of that.
I was super depressed. I was super sad. Distress. I honestly felt like so sad all the time. I remember because I couldn't really talk to anybody. And this is before I started talking to you guys more, but I would do this thing where I would make voice memos on my phone because at least it felt like I was saying it out loud to somebody so that I didn't feel like I was just in my head all the time. And I deleted all the memos after a while, but it was like hard to, like, I just see so many and I was like, this is not working. This is not fun to go through this alone. But even with my first marriage, when we got engaged, I was panicked because it didn't feel right to get married and do all of those things, even though I cared about the person. It just felt like the next step. So kind of in the same theme, it was just distress, but just keep moving forward.
Well, you've been sold this fairy tale, and I like what you said before about how you realized there were kind of 2 options, which was like, this isn't true, or it's true and it's terrible, because there really is a threshold you cross with like how much information you've been exposed to, where you're like, even if there is somehow a solution that like makes this all work together, it's so radically different from the dream I was sold my whole life. And it's barely recognizable from like the church I thought I was in.
Oh yeah.
So that's why I just think being an apologist has got to be the absolute worst.
I agree.
Worst thing, because even spending like some time in that space, it just is, it's just horrifying. I remember like a very specific like white hot terror that would like live in my body around that time that is like, I don't know, maybe it's come up a few other times in my life, but I still look back on it and like shudder to remember like the terror that is like in you.
Yeah, you just feel sick and scared all the time. And before, even if God wasn't answering or replying, it felt like I hoped at least someone was hearing me. But I think it was just the most alone I'd ever felt and just confused. Like I knew nothing about anything anymore. Like everything I thought about existence was immediately gone. And that's just a dark place to be. And it's hard to explain it to somebody if you haven't been there, I guess.
Did you have a lot of the like on your knees, please give me anything prayers?
Yeah, I had a lot more of those prayers. I even talked to Tanner once, and that was kind of his thing, as he said he did that. And so I tried doing that too, and I was still getting nothing. And I think the faith crisis, when I felt like I was losing everything right after I'd been married, it was kind of the last straw for me, because I was thinking, this is the worst I've ever felt. This is the most alone I've ever felt. And if you want me to continue to be part of your church and help you and give my life to you, you know, talking to God, please just give me something. Just give me some shred, like one shred of evidence that can prove that this is all going to be okay. And it was kind of the last just silence where nothing happened again. So, I mean, it was kind of like my third and final attempt at show me anything and I'll do anything you want. And it was nothing. And so how can you really go on after that many attempts that were like desperate attempts in loneliness and feeling nothing? I mean, people would tell me, oh, you can't tempt God for answers and you can't do all these things. But I don't feel like that's what I was doing. I was always trying to be humble and trying to just have comfort. So if it's okay for people, once again, to find their car keys because of God, it should be okay for me to ask for just a warmness or an answer of some kind. So.
And especially, well, you had seen Going Clear, so I feel like you'd already confronted a question that is so big, which is like, what if this isn't true?
Yeah.
I do feel like that is like such a key threshold. And you'd presumably got an understanding of like what it looks like for people to like be in a cult and not feel like they can leave even when they're finding this evidence.
Yeah, I'd seen a video of different people bearing their testimonies about their churches, their religions, and that was really impactful for me, because for the first time, you feel so special as a Mormon. You feel like we have all the answers and we know everything. That was the first time I felt like not special anymore, like officially not special. I was like, they all sound like exactly what I sound like when I'm going up there. How is this unique? And then there's that threshold that even if it is true, you realize, for me, at least, I realize even if it is true, I don't want to be a part of this thing, because it's cruel. It's cruel to so many different types of people. When you're a Mormon, you tend not to think about other people's experiences as much as your own. Like if it's working for you, then it's a great religion. But there was a letter, and I'm not going to remember his name or anything, but there was a Black man who had written a letter to the prophet at the time, and he was faithful, and it was about not understanding why he couldn't have the priesthood.
Is it Lowry Nelson? Is that his name?
I don't think Larry Nelson was Black.
Wait, no.
But that is a letter that
that's something similar.
Oh, okay.
But anyways, there's a letter,
and
it's
the one you're talking about, though.
And so he wrote asking.
He just had written a letter to the prophet at the time, you know, saying that he was a faithful member and he's given everything for the church. And he kind of went into all the things that you miss out on if you don't have the priesthood, and how he couldn't be sealed to his family, and how he couldn't give his children blessings and things like that. And he was just trying to say, I've given everything I have to the church and I will continue, but why is it that I can't have this? Like, why am I not good enough? And the prophet at the time didn't reply to him, but he replied to his bishop and basically said, you know, reply to this guy and keep an eye on him. And I'd seen how the church treated LGBTQ members through Prop 8. My aunt lives in California, and I heard a lot about that. So just seeing that, yeah, even if this is true, it's not everyone can be accepted here. And I didn't feel like Christ Church, as I was taught it was, just because it worked for me. And even though like I was a Mormon woman, and it didn't work for me in a lot of ways, it was still so much significantly better than the experience of so many other people. And it was just painful to kind of realize I'd been holding up this structure because it worked for me and ignoring how it hurt other people. And so I just started to feel the responsibility to not stand up for the church anymore, because it had hurt so many people that I knew and me. So
And how many people think it's working for them, but really they're just psychologically dependent on it and it's all they've ever known.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think about that a lot.
Yeah. It's scary to go outside of what you've known to be reality forever. It's like that quote from, what's that one? Truman Show, realities. We accept the reality in which we're presented. It's so true, though. It's just, how do you know anything else? How do you have the courage to step outside of that when it's comfortable and outside is scary and you're taught that the world is evil and you're, going to hell or outer darkness if you try to go outside the boat or whatever. So, I mean, there's a lot of programming to make you not go outside.
I remember the boat metaphor was big at that time.
It was. It really was.
And this was all happening while you're engaged?
Engaged and then newly married, yeah.
Okay, and it's all mostly you're just suffering through it alone?
Mm-hmm. Completely alone.
Did being married make you open up more about it to your husband, or?
Not really, because I thought he was still pretty believing, and because we were newly married, I was just afraid that I would lose the whole marriage over me not believing anymore, and that felt really embarrassing. So I didn't really talk to him. Yeah, it was just all private. Didn't talk to family. Didn't talk to anybody. There was just, I started to talk to you guys, you and Tanner and Blake, but there just wasn't anywhere to go. The church does not provide places for you to go if you have questions or you're leaving the church or anything like that. There's nothing like that.
How did you feel on your wedding day?
Stressed. And you can ask anybody in my family, they felt it too. But I just did not feel ready. And I forgot my recommend when we showed up for the sealing, and the lady there they had to give me another interview basically. And she was just saying, are you sure you got this done? Are you sure you interviewed? As if like I was just pretending that I got it.
That's so stressful.
So it was really embarrassing, but it all worked out. But yeah, I just didn't feel ready. I cried a lot that day.
Oh.
Yeah. But luckily when you cry on your wedding day, nobody thinks you're sad.
Yeah.
So,
Oh.
And I feel bad for my ex-husband because he's such a good person. Like, this was all on me. So
No.
Wow.
I mean, no, it wasn't his fault.
You've been
He's a wonderful
funneled
person.
through this track,
Yeah. Yeah.
So you were getting married because you were like, well, it's time. That's the next step.
Yep.
That's what I do. This
Pretty
guy's
much.
nice.
Yeah. And people, it's like a hard answer for a lot of people to accept, that it just felt like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's basically why. It just seemed like the right thing to do. And he was cute and he was nice and he treated me well. So that's what I did.
And so he knew what percentage of your loss of faith when you got married?
None.
So like, yeah, that's like red flag. If you're afraid to tell your fiance that your beliefs have changed, there is a problem. And I'm going to just say, Samantha's kind of new as a co-host. We generally try not to refer to the Mormon Church as a cult on Mormon Stories podcast because we want to make sure that people, number one, we know the term is insulting, and we also want to make sure everyone who listens feels kind of safe. So that's a controversial term, and I'm not rebuking you, Samantha. I'm just like making sure believing listeners that are listening, we don't mean to offend. We try not to do that. There's a whole series on what is a cult with Stephen Hassan or with Luna Corbden. You can go decide for yourself if you think the Mormon Church meets criteria. It's not a big deal, Samantha. But
Well,
I just go ahead.
In my co-host defense, though, I would personally call it that. I know, and I generally tried to say hi to Mormon religion, but it was because we were talking about Scientology. So I said other cults referring to Scientology. So that is like implicating Mormonism in that. But
Yeah.
in my head, I was referring to Scientology.
Okay.
But
good.
yeah, it is my personal opinion that it meets the criteria decently enough.
Yeah. And I just say to the church, if you don't want people to call you a cult, make it so that people like Chandler aren't afraid to tell her fiance the factual, truthful, historical information that she learned about the church because you, the Mormon Church, hid it from her and from all of us, such that she could disclose that and also change your culture around what people's assumptions are about why a wedding might be called off. Because I can imagine once the invitations have been sent, once the wedding has been scheduled, if you were to have called off the marriage or to have decided not to get married in the temple, what would all of your Mormon friends and family have assumed?
Oh yeah, that we had slipped up or something had happened.
Meaning?
We'd had sex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sinner.
Yeah. I know. And we didn't. So it would have been a real bummer to have people think that. But yeah, it's just hard because Mormonism, you feel this pressure to get married fast if you're dating somebody. It's not like a date for a while and figure it out. It's hurry and get married, get into the temple. And that way you can also have sex because then there's not the temptation. And I feel like that's the thing it robs a lot of people of is the opportunity to date somebody for a long time to actually decide if you want to get married or not. Instead, you rush into marriages and then there's the shame of if it doesn't work out because you rushed into it, you have to get a divorce, which is also pretty shameful in the church.
Yeah. And I just can't imagine you carrying that through your wedding day and keeping that from your spouse. It's not that you wanted to be dishonest.
No, not at all. I think the thing I learned from my mom that is the best trait is she is so honest. She has so much integrity, and I learned that from my mom. And so there are times like that growing up in the church, and then getting married and not being able to tell my spouse something that felt really shameful because I felt like I was withholding the truth, which, feels like a lie. It can be a lie. And it felt like I couldn't ever do everything right because if I was telling the truth, then I was losing something. And then if I was withholding the truth, then I was not being true to myself. So you're always kind of caught between those things.
It's a double bind. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what was that like to have to do the bishop's interviews and go through the temple and to do a supposed eternal marriage in a Mormon temple as a non-believer? It
was rough. It was so weird because I didn't know that I wasn't going to get to wear my wedding dress when we got sealed. So finding out I had to put on all this stuff and mess up my hair. I had a flower crown, so I had to take it off and it kind of ruined my hair. It was just a disappointment. And then having all the interviews with the bishop and all of that to get to that point, I just felt so guilty that I was lying, even though I didn't really believe in the thing. I just felt like so bad. I feel like I was turning my back on this thing that I'd known forever and that I was tricking, I guess, my husband by not telling him. But it's not how I would have intended it. It's just I didn't know what choice I had if I wanted to stay with him.
Yeah.
And you are still keeping all the rules. It sucks that you're feeling so guilty because you just don't believe something that is supposed to be true that you have put lots of time into trying to believe.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And it's not a great way to start a marriage.
No, it's not.
Brutal.
It's not fair to either people. That's for sure.
Yeah. And this is on the church because the Mormon church has, for over 100 years, it knew about the Book of Abraham in 1912. It was on the cover of the it was on the cover of the New York Times. It knew about the anachronisms in the Book of Mormon by 1922 because B.H. Roberts put the entire First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 and all the general authorities on notice that the Book of Mormon had the view of the Hebrews, all that stuff. They knew that. Yep. And then Fawn Brodie comes out with No Man Knows My History in 1945. She is the prophet's niece. And she talks about the polygamy and the stone in the hat and everything. And they chose to excommunicate her. And we just had foretelling the truth and then hide it from the members forever. Mm-hmm. And we just did an amazing multi-hour interview with Newell Bringhurst about his biography on Fawn McKay Brodie. And if you have not listened to that, she is a legend, not just a female legend, a legend, bar none. She is an OG in all respects for writing that book, No Man Knows My History, pre-internet, pre-Tanners, without, just
incredible.
Anyway, check out that episode, No Man Knows My History. We'll put a link to it here. But anyway, it's the church's fault. They put you in that position. They put your husband in that position. Anybody who's you lied in your temple, you deceived people. No.
I know.
Nope, none of that. None of those comments.
And it's so hard because people always say, oh, you're just blaming the church. And I don't mean to blame them, but I don't really see what choice I had. It's kind of the theme of my life is thinking I was making choices. And then I look back and I'm thinking I felt like I was possessed or something. It didn't feel like it was me making the choices because once again, I didn't have many options. It was already laid out for me. So I don't mean to blame the church, but I also think they should be held somewhat accountable for the things that people go through on their behalf.
Okay, so you start off your marriage super sad and traumatized again.
Yep. Yeah. So it's great and terrible all at the same time, but pretty quickly, there was a conversation that or a group text between, I think it was Sam, Tanner, and our friend Blake and I, just about some of our questions. And I had been super sick this one time, and I'd left my phone out, and my ex-husband was not like a snoopy person, but I knew he could sense that something was going on, and I wasn't telling him anything. And so I had got up and I saw that he was just glancing at it. And we both just knew that he knew at that point that I was done. Mm-hmm. And so he said, we can talk about this basically. But, we waited until I felt better because I was sick at the time. And then just from then on, we just had a lot of discussions about things. And it turned out that he felt pretty similarly to me about a lot of the issues that I had.
Your husband did?
Uh-huh. Okay. He did, yeah. So it was nice once it was kind of out there to know that I had somebody that I could confide in. And we just figured out, we both feel pretty similarly. He was done with the church as well. He had a pretty intense family as well. Good people, but definitely pretty strong in the church. So there was a lot of pressure on him to stay believing. But eventually, I think he told his family. I think he had announced it to his family at one point. I don't remember exactly, but they were still kind and they still supported us. They would always invite us to things still, like general conference and whatnot, but they were better than we expected. So that was nice. But so there was a period of time where him and I were both on the same page as far as beliefs go. But once we got past that, for me, it was kind of this realization that I was only 22 when I got married, and that's so young. As a Mormon girl, I thought that was actually kind of old. I thought I'd be married when I was, 21, 22, or whatever, 21, and I was 22. But that just all of a sudden hit me that I had missed out on a lot of regular life experiences. And not to say I didn't care about my ex-husband, but I just felt like I had missed out on a lot and that we were too young to make a good decision if we were ready to get married. Like I said, we dated for such a short period of time, and there's no opportunity for you guys to just date for a really long time and figure out if you're compatible or not. So then I started to have the guilt of realizing maybe this wasn't a good decision to get married.
Which I got married at 22 as well. And I really relate to that. Like, it's kind of on the older side in, BYU-Idaho culture, and how the church has been historically. But you only have what the church has taught you about what to look for in a spouse, and you have absolutely zero concept of marriage. You might think you do.
Oh, yeah.
But I look back now and I think it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Mm-hmm. I look back and think I knew absolutely nothing about what it took to make a relationship work. But as far as the church is concerned, you're 22, they're a return missionary, you do everything right. So that's the next step.
Yeah. What more do you need? But yeah, once again, you have people getting married that your brain isn't even fully developed, and you're getting married. You're making that type of a commitment at that age. It's really bizarre.
And I think a lot about how intergenerational that phenomenon is. So the people that you're looking to, let's say the church leaders, for advice on marriage and what to look for in a spouse, they have most likely sought out a spouse with even less kind of data. Because I feel like the further you go back in Mormon history, the quicker people would get married and the less they were looking for. And if anything, it's the way that we would date was kind of modern for Mormonism throughout its history, it used to just be I'm going to set you up with my grandson. Yep. You're pretty enough. And then boom.
Yep.
It's madness. You have no idea.
Yeah, it really is. So, yeah.
what was it? You don't have to answer. I don't know what you want to share, but like, what was it like transitioning to suddenly being allowed to be sexual after all the experiences you'd had and that being so tied to so much guilt?
It wasn't good at all. It was a huge problem for sure. It was so confusing for me because all of my life I had felt such intense shame and guilt for feeling those things. And then all of a sudden it's like red light, green light, right? All of a sudden it's, you're supposed to be this way all the time, go crazy. And that just didn't work for me. I didn't know how to process feeling okay with that. So that marriage for sure suffered because of that guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you felt guilty about then not being sexual enough.
Yeah, I think it was just, I felt shame around sex still. So it was like, even though I was a married person, I would still cry. I would still feel like that response of shame after something had happened because I'd always felt that way. And my brain just couldn't change it over like some people are more able to do.
That's what drives me crazy is like, there's no understanding from the LDS Church that you can't build these neural pathways throughout a lifetime of sex and shame and then just expect them to be gone on a wedding night.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's a lot.
And I think people that haven't experienced it probably don't understand why sex isn't just super amazing because you get to have sex, right?
Yeah. And the hard part is you expect it to be that easy. You're just, all right, I'm going to feel great. And I know some people do, but I know a lot of people don't. Yeah, and I just wasn't one of those people. I thought it's going to be great. And yeah, the shame just came right back as if nothing had changed. Because I mean, in a way, what's the difference? Like you're just married in that case. It's not really that different as if it's a high school boyfriend that you love or it's someone you're married to. The result's kind of the same thing. So the shame.
But someone would say you have permission now from the bishop and the state president and the church.
Yeah, but I guess
it doesn't
so many formative years of telling yourself that it's wrong and shameful and gross and dirty and irresponsible can't just be, washed away. So that was really difficult.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Just getting into the conversation, but it's like your eroticism also gets built up around this, doing things that are wrong. And so then having permission can be like the least sexual thing in the world, I think, for a lot of people, least sexy thing in the world.
True.
Yeah.
So
and it's so classic patriarchy to be like, switch off everything sexual about yourself. But then the minute that a man, owns you, then you need to be a hot little slut all the time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But you're not wrong. Yeah. So that was a rough thing to figure out when I got into that marriage.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. And again, these are all things the church could really fix quite easily.
I think so.
And it's an epidemic. I mean, this is almost every interview I do on Mormon stories. The women often feel as you do.
Yeah. Most of my friends have had similar experiences too. So I know I'm definitely one of many.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yeah. So how did things continue?
So basically it just got to the point where I accepted that I was too young to have made that decision and that I loved this person, but I felt like there was just more to life that I needed to experience. And so I had to break it to him. And I think he felt...
So you loved him.
Yeah.
But you just felt I did this too early?
I just felt like him and I were more friends instead of like a romantic relationship maybe. But once again, when you're dating, you're not looking for all those details in a relationship. It's as long as they're an RM and they hold the priesthood and that's pretty much like the requirements, I think. So as long as they're those things, then that's all that matters. You're not really looking for anything outside of that, or they're good looking. But yeah, so I just hadn't really ever thought, we weren't dating for long enough for me to consider those things. So I just felt like, all right, this is going to be better for both of us because I was struggling in a lot of ways. I mean, sexually, it was like impossible for me to figure that out. And so I was just realizing this isn't fair to the person I'm with to have to be drug along with me through this. At least they can go off and heal and find somebody else and things like that. So,
and maybe he wasn't totally done with the church yet.
He was done with the church.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
So, and it was nice that we saw eye to eye on that, but I think even when you both see eye to eye on that, then you realize there's still other things in a marriage that even if you both agree that you don't believe in the church, that aren't going to be compatible.
And again, I'm just going to call it out that if the Mormon church, when you serve a Mormon mission, the last thing you do on your mission is you interview with your mission president before you leave. And did you have this interview with your mission president? And do you know what I'm about to say?
I think I know what you're going to say, but I didn't have the interview. They kind of just sent me off.
What am I going to say?
It's about the first thing you got to get married, basically.
Yeah. The first thing you're told is get married and have kids. You know what I mean? And so at BYU and BYU-Idaho and Hawaii, you get home and you're looking for your spouse and you marry as soon as you can, super short courtship, super short engagement because you can't have sex. And then you get married, and that's on the church, because not only are they hiding things from people, and so you were set up in terms of your beliefs crumbling. That's on the church, not on you. You're also set up from the standpoint of you not really knowing yourself, let alone your husband and your relationship well enough to make that sort of a lifelong commitment.
Yes.
True?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly true.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was just...
Because these are things that in a normal, healthy courtship, you probably could have figured out.
Yes.
And that's not, a lot of my listeners are like, John, you're advocating for sexual promiscuity and irresponsibility. No.
Yeah, no.
I'm advocating for healthy developmental, normative sexual development and processes.
Yeah.
And I can say it sounds crazy. If sex is one of the top 3 reasons people get divorced, it's your own sexual attractions, your own sexual template, and your sexual compatibility with the person you're going to be married to is probably a pretty important thing to establish prior to a lifelong commitment, not after. Now, I'm not, I'm not, tell me I'm crazy, Samantha.
No, I think you'd be crazy to say anything else. Not that everyone can make their own decisions in life, but I mean, what is sexual promiscuity? I think the thing you don't want to be advocating for is non-consensual sex, sex that is like reckless, like with your health or with birth control, stuff like that. But, I don't think you should be apologizing for suggesting that sexual compatibility is important to discover prior to committing to someone for eternity, in theory.
Yeah.
And after doing this interview with Lena and Sal, your own sexual attractions, like there's one thing whether you think someone's cute or aesthetically attractive, but your actual sexual attraction is something that if you don't have some sort of experimentation with, you don't know.
Yeah.
And how many people have I interviewed, and tens of thousands do I know about, that got married only to find they actually weren't sexually attracted to the entire gender of the person to whom they married, right?
Yeah, no, it's very common. And I think that it just, once again, it just didn't give us the opportunity to date and figure those things out. And because we weren't allowed to have a sexual relationship before getting married, I wasn't able to realize the work that I still needed to do to get to a place where I could have a healthy sexual relationship. And that really wasn't fair to either of us in that situation.
It's like you were never allowed to own your sexuality, because then even when you're married, you feel responsible for this other person's, sexual fulfillment. And it's also Mormonism. You're not really allowed to explore your own sexuality. And so it's just all constantly giving your sexuality to someone else, or not owning your own sexuality.
Constantly. It's like your body just never feels like it's your own. I think that was something I didn't have the words for until even recently, but I just never felt like I was my own. I was always a man's, whether it's your husband or your dad's or God's child. It's just, you're always a man's something and you're never your own.
And combined with your experiences with sexual assault, it's like, no wonder you want to exert some kind of control over your body, and food's a way that you have that control as a Mormon woman.
Yep, for sure it was. Yeah. And not processing a lot of that sexual trauma was a huge, it had a huge impact on that too.
It's almost like you not only didn't process it, but you kind of like compounded the trauma because then there was shame. Well, I
Yep.
guess that's actually true for people outside of religion too. But you know,
But definitely true.
it's like next level adding suffering.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to belabor this point, but the fact that the Mormon Church prohibits and even demonizes masturbation means that you can literally, because they're like, well, you should be able to figure it out. Like if you're a woman as an example and you never even try that, and there are many Mormon women that make it to marriage without ever even having masturbated before or had any sort of orgasm ever. Again, that makes it even harder for you to know beforehand anything about your sexuality.
You know
right?
nothing. Yeah. And all my prior experiences were just that it's shameful or something you don't want. So that's all I had to work with.
And I don't mean to disclose for my mom, but she would be okay with me saying this. It wasn't just not only until her marriage that she had never had an orgasm. It was probably 15 years into her marriage before she ever had an orgasm. And that's not uncommon for a Mormon woman
uncommon.
either.
Nope. Hear about that frequently too.
Have we beat this horse dead yet, Samantha?
The sexuality.
Yeah.
I mean, it's huge. Like you said, like there's a reason it comes up in every person's interview.
Yeah. I think it has so much of an effect on so many Mormon people, but Mormon women in particular. I just feel like it's been such a huge part of my life. Everything's tied to, it's kind of the best thing about me and the worst thing about me. That's always how I felt, is that I'm a sexual person, that I'm a woman. That's like the best, but it's also the most embarrassing and terrible thing, that I have this power over men somehow and that they just can't control themselves, and I should keep it in check. So it's weird to hold those two thoughts all at the same time. It's like, this is great, this is horrible, this is great, this is horrible. Don't know how you land on that it's great when you're always feeling shame.
Yeah, it's like you're objectified by this patriarchal religion and taught that your primary worth is as a spouse and a baby machine.
Yeah.
And then you never get to like claim that sexuality for yourself.
Yeah. And the amount of therapy that friends of mine that have had to go to in their marriages, Mormon marriages, it's just, I would say like most. So there's something wrong that needs to be addressed or done differently. And I don't have any real faith that that will happen, especially after, Natasha's excommunication. But there's just a problem, and it hurts me to know it's going on now, and it's impacting people right now, and it's going to affect them for their entire lives. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty important subject.
I have a kind of a backtracking question that is a bit getting away from sexuality. But so in the time period between you kind of losing all your faith and when you decided to get divorced, first of all, how long was that time period?
But from when I lost my faith to when I was first divorced.
Well, I guess you kind of had lost your faith before your marriage, right? So, well, when were you and your husband like on the same page?
Probably like, I would say 6 months into the marriage.
Okay. And then you got divorced like
2 years into the marriage.
Okay. So what was that period of time like where like you'd lost your faith? You even like had a husband who was kind of on the same page as you, but like, did you still feel lost? What did you think about life, and how was your mood? And
it was all over the place. It was just a really scary time. I honestly don't even remember that much of it now, just because it felt like almost like I was sleepwalking. I didn't know what to make of anything. I didn't know what to believe about the future, who I was, about it felt like I truly knew nothing. I felt like I was just plopped into the world and like I had a baby brain or something. I felt so confused. And I think it was scary because, like I said, my mom has so much integrity, and I've always had that integrity, but mostly because I thought there was a God watching me. And when all of a sudden I didn't feel like there was this God watching me, you kind of have to reassess what is okay. And so once you're like, well, I guess if nothing matters, then not to say I did any of these things, but like I could steal something, and what does it matter? Because there's no God. And so there was just this really confusing, tricky part of that time period where I was just having to redefine what is good and what is not good, and simplify what I even believed in. But, you know, I came to the conclusion, obviously, that doing the right thing is the right thing just because it's right, not because somebody's watching. And I think that's true integrity. But that was a horrible, that's a time I look back on my life with just a lot of sadness. I just felt like I was taking this wonderful person down with me, and I had no goals. I just didn't know who I was because the church was everything. It was what I spent all my time thinking about. It was what I gave all my energy to. Everything about me was wrapped into the church. So I just felt like nothing, pretty much.
Were there any?
Can I just will you put a pin, because I really want to hear the next question you're about to ask. I just have to reinforce one point we've kind of been making all along, because remember, during those teen years where you're feeling all that sexual shame, your response, and when you weren't getting answers from Heavenly Father, your response was, I'll try harder, I'll try harder, I'll try harder with the church. And so by the time you're now a young adult, the church had conditioned you to view the church as everything.
Yes.
And you had given everything. And so that makes it just so much more brutal than when the Mormon world comes unraveled. Yeah. Because this wasn't just like, oh, it's a set of beliefs that I choose to follow because it helps me be a good person. Yep. It's your entire identity. It's your friendships. It's your family. It's your relationships. It's your morality. It's your spirituality. It's what? It's
everything. I mean, that's the only word. It's everything. It felt like having sort of a version of parents, I guess, that always told you how to feel, think, what to believe, that everything's okay. It just gives you all the direction. It's a built-in community. It's all those things. So all of a sudden, it's just like true silence. Like, even though I'd never had answers, I just always hoped that something is still there. And it was the first time I ever had to come to terms with, I'm just by myself. I'm just alone. And it's I don't know if there's even a good word for it. It's just empty. You just feel empty and hopeless. And I think I did feel, I don't know if it's like triggering for people, but like I did feel somewhat suicidal a lot of the time. Not that I had any plan or intention on doing that, but I just kept feeling like, what's the point? I just had lost everything. I was afraid I was going to lose my family. I was afraid I was going to lose my friends, the community that I'd spent all my time with growing up, and I was going to let them down. So yeah, I just thought a lot about what's the point of being alive. If the church isn't true, then nothing else matters. So I lost a lot of myself. It was just dark. That was a rough period.
And Samantha, jumping to you in just one sec. Like we'll never see a Methodist Stories podcast or a Lutheran Stories podcast or an Episcopalian Stories podcast or a Unitarian Stories podcast. Nobody who hasn't lived in a high demand religion has any idea why losing your faith in and or leaving that religion would cause you to potentially want to die by suicide unless you yourself have experienced it. No one can get it. And that's why we're over 1,500 episodes into Mormon Stories podcast, and we're more popular than ever because it's so brutal. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And you think you're the only person and you're just alone, and that's just not true, but you believe it. And even in the beginning, I think I still felt a bit like blaming myself for like being hard on myself for believing everything and not asking questions. And I think we all do that. Like we all think, why did I not ask, or why did I not dig? And they don't
I see it earlier.
Yeah. You feel stupid. And I think a lot of people look at you and think like, why were you so stupid? How could you have,
like I was 4.
Yeah. I mean, how could I have known any
at what
different?
point in your childhood when everyone is telling you just believe, don't question, questioning's bad?
Yeah. And it's not an option.
You to be some kind of genius 4-year-old.
Exactly. So, and there's so many smart people around you. So you just look at them and you think they're smart. So this all makes sense. It was hard being mad at myself for thinking about, why did I not try harder to ask more questions? Rough time.
Brutal.
Well, now thinking about the suicidal feeling you can have when you leave a high demand religion, which I'm also familiar with, I often think about how we're so wired to protect our beliefs at all costs, and like we're a tribal species, and we come from ancestors who were in these tribes with shared beliefs, and because everything in us is so geared towards getting us to maintain beliefs and stay in the tribe, it's almost like a little bit unprecedented in nature for us to leave. So it kind of feels like a new, well, I mean, it's not new, but yeah, I don't know. It feels like a new problem in a way. I mean, especially obviously now with the internet and stuff. It's like we have nothing in our brains to prepare ourselves really for like such an intense loss of worldview.
Oh yeah. I don't think anyone could be prepared for what it is unless you live most of your life in it and then you lose it. So
yeah.
But that's why it's so harsh and offensive when people who really don't know anything about you want to say that, oh, you just didn't try hard enough, or you just didn't want to believe in it, or you didn't take it seriously, or
you wanted to sin,
or whatever. They don't see those weeks, days, months, whatever, years of loneliness, the suicidal feelings. And I just wish people would have more empathy. They don't know how lonely it can be to be going through that, to lose everything. It's not a choice. It's not something, I mean, it can be a choice. Sometimes Mormonism just isn't for certain people, and that's a valid reason in itself. But for the people who suffer through it, it's not easy. It's lonely.
And I don't think people realize how much you've already shamed yourself. I even remember I was trying so hard and like reading the scriptures for hours and shaming myself because I was doing too much. And I was like, oh, I just need to be more chill. And why can't I just be more relaxed and let things go?
Yeah.
You've like tried every angle.
Yeah.
The question I was going to ask before is, in that period where you were still married and didn't believe and you were kind of lost, was there, and maybe you were too depressed for this to be on your mind, but was there any like, I don't know, like resources that you sought out, or like threads you pulled at in terms of like trying to figure out what was true? Like I remember I got really into Sam Harris for a while and that was really helpful. Like what kind of things like captured your attention at that time?
Good question. I feel like it took me a while to start embracing other things. There was a book that I read, and I honestly don't remember what it was now, but Dalai Lama had a bunch of parts in there. And I think I liked a lot of aspects about Buddhism. And I think just simplifying down to believing, I'm just going to do others no harm and no harm to myself, and try to leave the world better than it was how I found it. It was just that simple for me because everything was just so much noise growing up, just all the requirements and all the things you have to believe and do and the upkeep. And so for me, it was like the simpler, the better. But I did actually get into the Sam Harris podcast for a while there too at first. But I think just talking to, friends that were going through the same thing and then getting into Facebook groups was really helpful for me, at least just finding that community aspect again was more important than filling beliefs in, I guess, for me at that point.
Any other resources, Mormon related resources besides CES Letter that were helpful to you during that time? And it's fine if there weren't any.
I think that was the main one. I mean, occasionally Tanner would send me a link for certain things, or there would be like a directory that he had put together that had information. But I think the CES Letter pretty much covered everything.
You hadn't gotten into like YouTube or podcasts or anything like that?
Not yet. I mean, I'm trying to think of when I first started listening to Mormon stories, and it wouldn't have been, you know what? No, it would have been when I was married to him then, because the Tom Phillips episode was the one that was like the final straw for me. That was
What about that? Tell the listeners what that is.
So the Tom Phillips episode was about the second anointing, and it's just, I mean, I don't know how to perfectly describe the second anointing, but it's like a secret ceremony for basically Mormon elite. But I didn't know anything about that. I didn't even know that existed. I had all my stuff on my shelf, and so when I heard that, it was just this disappointment that there was this level of secrecy and encouraging that people can lie about things within the church if it's for in their opinion, a good reason. That just wasn't cool to me at all. And hearing his experience, particularly how he thought he was going to see Christ or something that day, and then how he didn't, and how he was kind of just stuck with that off feeling that it wasn't what he thought it was going to be. I think that was the first time I'd heard somebody else put it that way. And I realized if it's that way up at the top, it's not going to get much better where I am. So that was so your podcast actually would have been during that time period as well.
I'll add that episode to the show notes.
Okay. It's a good one. It's a heavy
Yeah.
one, but it's good.
I think that was the first one I listened to of yours.
Yeah, because it's British.
Hey.
Must have been why. It was much more accessible than your usual Americanized content, John.
Well, all right.
Yeah. So Mormon Stories was super helpful. And I will say,
I
I
wasn't
mean,
fishing for that.
I didn't think you were, but I'm glad you brought it up.
We all had a
because-
Mormon Stories binge phase.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was the thing I listened to on repeat during the period where I was alone, and then after we were divorced. I mean, it felt like it felt like a friend, because you can't, even if you have a group of friends in a text, you don't want to constantly be every second saying, "Here's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling like so hopeless, and I'm feeling suicidal." So when you listen to a podcast like Mormon Stories and Lindsay Hansen Park, her podcast,
Your polygamy?
I love her so much. She was such an example to me when I was coming out of the church. I mean, there was a time that I wrote her a Facebook message and she replied instantly and was so nice. And I just admire her so much. But yeah, that was also, Your Polygamy was also a really good resource. But it was nice to have those podcasts because it felt like a constant friend if I didn't want to be a burden to like other people in my life. So podcasts were really helpful.
Okay. So I guess you had to go through the painful stigma of getting divorced in Mormonism.
Yep. Not fun. Not fun at all. You definitely feel like a failure. But when I got divorced, it was the first time in my life that I was free, I guess you could say. I didn't believe anymore. I didn't have anything that was pressing me on how to live or how to think, how to act. It was the first time in my life I could start asking myself what I wanted. And I think it's strange to think that so many people don't ask themselves that question, what do I want in their lives when you're Mormon? But it felt really freeing to be just on my own and have permission to do basically whatever I wanted. So it was maybe one of the best time periods of my life was when I was newly divorced and I was just my own person finally. Like, I owned my body, I had my own space, I could make my own new friends, and my life was just my own. And I became really intentional about the choices I was making for the first time. And it just felt, I look back on that time period as so wonderful.
That's
just
great.
Bright.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you went from feeling suicidal to like happier than ever.
Yeah, it was a weird
It reminds
transition.
me of that Tangled episode where she's like sobbing and then doing cartwheels.
Oh my gosh. It's
right?
exactly right, though. It was kind of just always, what is it going to be? And I say this, and I don't think it's like this for everyone, but I almost feel like I just woke up one day and was just, I just felt different. I just felt like, why am I giving this so much more thought? And like, I'm free. And I don't know. I just felt like one day I just felt differently. And not to say there was still unprocessed trauma in the background, but I was able to kind of put it to the side and just live my life for a time period. And that was super wonderful. Had a lot of great, fun, awesome experiences that like adults can have. I just feel like a lot of Mormons' childhood and young adult life is kind of blurred together. You don't really have a young adult life that's typical. So it was cool to get to have some experiences.
That is so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you do like little kid style dating.
Exactly.
Making
Just feel young.
faults.
Yeah. Finger paints.
I remember that I had a similar experience right after divorce, just that period of like the pain is still there and there's still grief and trauma, but just like so much freedom after you've like felt trapped for so long, just to feel
Feels
free.
good.
And you're like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah. You're ready to kind of push it to the side and just enjoy yourself. And I'm really thankful for that portion of my life.
And it's like you're allowed to be present fully for the first time because you're not doing everything with some like heavenly pursuit in mind.
Well, and you're not going out with people and thinking on the first time seeing them, am I going to marry this person? Is this person a good fit for me? You can just have fun. So yeah, being intentional for the first time and reading The Power of Now was also crucial to my healing and moving forward.
By Eckhart Tolle.
Yep. And then A New Earth was equally
Also
powerful.
reading.
Oh,
So
I
good.
forget that you also love Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, so that was really helpful to me, just enjoying what I was doing, because I think when you're Mormon, you're always focused on the afterlife. You're always thinking about what you're doing now, how it's going to impact you in the afterlife. So you're not really present because everything you do here is just kind of written off as, well, it won't matter as much in the afterlife or whatever. And so I think it doesn't give you the opportunity to focus on the current life and the one that you're certain that you have. So that was a gift to kind of get to enjoy the life I know I get.
So what can go wrong? Like you were living the dream, right?
I know. No, it was going great. And
you should, I think in your outline, you also mentioned you're not wearing, you, at some point you got to stop wearing garments.
Yes, that was the first thing to go, to be honest. Garments was not a hard one for me to get rid of.
I heard someone describe it as, woohoo.
Yeah, pretty much. I had no pains getting rid of the garments or paying tithing. Done with that.
And then you got to date non-Mormon men or whatever.
Yeah.
And even, I guess there was some word of wisdom stuff in there.
Yeah. I mean, I tried a little bit of everything and got to have good experiences. I mean, growing up, I thought like if you drank alcohol or if you smoked marijuana or anything like that, you were instantly a bad person and you were a different person. And being someone who has a lot of issues with letting go of control, I was really intimidated by those things. But honestly, and I know everyone's different. Some people don't want to try it and some people have bad experiences. But for me, it was a good experience to get to try alcohol and those things because it was just another learning experience for me that I'm not a different person. I'm not out of control. And it's okay to be a little out of control sometimes is not going to kill you because really we're not in control. We just feel like we're in control. But so it was a healthy learning
Buddhist
experience. Yeah. I'm not Buddhist, but I agree with a lot of their beliefs and teachings. But
okay.
So doing all that was fun and a great, safe experience. I never got out of control. I didn't become addicted to anything. I don't think I have much of an addictive personality, but it was all in good fun.
All right. So smooth sailing from there. Story over.
Yep, that's it. It's a wrap. No, and still trying to decide how much of this next portion to get into, and I probably won't go too crazy, but I had met another guy and I was not believing at the time and I was under the impression that he really wasn't super active at the time either. And then we just started dating and I really liked him and really cared about him. And just somewhere along our relationship, he realized that, he really still cared about his Mormon upbringing and that he wanted to continue to be LDS and to follow kind of all those guidelines and rules and get married in the temple and all of that. So I found myself at an interesting point because I finally was free of all these things and I was feeling really good. And then I meet this person that I really love and I think it's all good. And then all of a sudden it's like, here's that thing again. And I wanted to make it work because I cared about him and I still had a soft spot for Mormonism because so many of my people were still in it. And I just thought, I can do this again. I can make it work for myself because I'll just go and help all of the people that are struggling in the church because they need help too. And like, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? So I kind of hyped myself back into it. And it's something that I never would have guessed for myself that I would have tried to get back into. I thought I was done. There was so much damage, but here I was because I met this person that I loved. I just thought it can all be okay. I can make it work again. And that wasn't a new theme for me in my life of thinking I can make it right this time. I can be good enough this time to make it work. So there I was trying to make it work basically.
So you entered into a second Mormon marriage sort of.
Well, eventually, yeah. Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
The pull is hard. The gravity is hard. It's
bad.
like the moon revolving around the earth or the earth revolving around the sun. How do you get away?
I know. It just felt like this thing kept finding me, Mormonism, and I just couldn't stay away fully from it. So I had agreed that we could get married in the temple and all of that. And there's so much of a process that would go into that. And I felt very afraid about it, but I was ready to do it for this person.
So were you framing that as just lying or were you doing kind of what I ended up doing for a while, which is kind of like, well, what does it really mean to believe in God? And what does it mean to believe in Jesus? Really?
Yeah.
Kind of nuancing the questions.
That's definitely.
okay.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And I honestly had some really good conversations with some of the stake presidents and bishops that I had to meet with. It was weirdly enjoyable, even though it was painful. And I wouldn't do that again, obviously. But yeah, I think I just convinced myself that I could make it work. Because when you love somebody, it can work.
And let's face it, there's plenty of people that get married in Mormon temples that don't really fully believe
for sure.
some or all of it.
For sure. And so I just hyped myself up. I was like, I can do this. Well, then COVID happened, and him and I had been dating for a while, just a couple of years, I think. But anyways, so COVID happens, and then all the temples closed down. And so we couldn't get married in the temple. So we just had a regular COVID small wedding. We couldn't go on a honeymoon or anything like that. It was just very simple. And things were going pretty well. And surprise, surprise, all of the things that haunted me came back about Mormonism, all my hard feelings and traumas and things that I didn't believe but tried to make work again. They just all came back, and I was kind of naive in thinking I could make it work. And I'm sure anybody listening is going to be like, you're so stupid. Like, how could you not have guessed this would be the outcome? But once again, that wasn't unfamiliar to me, thinking I'm the problem. I can just try again and make whatever it is work if I just try hard enough.
So I'm wondering about at least three things based on what I've heard so far in terms of like, there's sort of like what you're communicating with your spouse about in terms of your disbelief, because if he is still partially believing or trying to make the church work, I can imagine you being open and honest about the things you struggle with at the church being issue number one, potentially. Issue number two, potentially, is what you're vocal about or what you say publicly, because that can always be a source of a contention if you're in kind of a mixed faith relationship.
Yeah.
And then the third thing, which again, I'm not prying, full informed consent, is just the sexual stuff that may or may not get resolved in your situation.
Yeah.
So anything you want to talk about, any of that or not?
Yeah.
You can just say pass.
Definitely. No, I would say that as far as our conversations about belief and disbelief went, it was, and I don't say this to make him sound bad in any way. I mean, he was just doing what the church teaches you to do. It doesn't teach you how to process somebody having questions or doubts. But there just wasn't room to really talk about doubts in our relationship. And it was hard because I kind of had to just put them aside like I used to. And I just had to push forward even with these painful feelings of doubt and questions. But I just like wanted to make it work so bad. I wanted Mormonism to accept me. I wanted to have a space for people who don't believe or don't believe typically. So it was hard, but yeah, so we didn't really talk a lot about the things that I disagreed with. We just kind of didn't talk about it. We would talk about the things that we liked or whatever, but not so much the bad stuff.
And for those who don't get it, what's hard about just ignoring that or pretending like it doesn't exist or just packing it down?
It's going to come up sometime. I mean, you could put it away, but it's not going to go away forever. Just like trauma, it doesn't just disappear. It's going to resurface at some point. So
it's like zombies. You bury them and they crawl out of the grave. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So, yeah. So for that was tough. And I don't remember what your second.
Were you wanting to be public about your questions and doubts? Was that an issue?
It was kind of a weird place for me because I wanted him to see that I was really trying to make it work. And so I publicly, even though it was hard for me, wanted to be showing the things I liked about the church so that he didn't think all I was doing was talking about the bad stuff about the church, because I had a YouTube video that was my experience leaving the church. So I would try to almost counterbalance the negative things I was public about with saying good things or posting quotes.
So you had created a YouTube channel by this point?
I had a YouTube channel and it just had one video basically about my experience with Mormonism, but it had a lot of views.
Is that video still up or is it down?
I think it might be down, but I will put it back up.
Okay.
Yeah, but it would just be
when's
under
the YouTube channel launching? When's the YouTube channel launching for real?
I do need to do that, but yeah. So I do have a YouTube channel. I just haven't posted anything since that video.
We can help you.
Yes,
welcome.
Please do.
Your
Please
launch
do.
pad.
Yes.
I have a random comment/question. Cause I didn't realize you were planning on getting married in the temple, but you were planning on getting married in the temple, but you didn't have a Mormon approved wedding dress. Which, by the way, your wedding dress was gorgeous. Both your wedding dresses were gorgeous.
The wedding dress situation was crazy because I fully anticipated it being made modest. The people where I bought it from, they told me that the designer was going to send me a bag of fabric that they could make sleeves from. And when I got the dress, the bag there was like 2 pieces of fabric. And I was like, what am I going to do? But it was at the same time I got the dress that the temples closed. So I was like, well, I'm just going to make it how I want to make it. I'm going to wear my dress however I'm going to wear it. And my, at the time, husband, he did not care about that. He was totally okay with me wearing the dress as it was.
As long as you look hot.
Yeah, so I don't think he had too much trouble with that.
So can we include a photo of your wedding dress on the show notes?
Put it on the screen.
I'll add you one. Okay. Yeah, it's a beautiful dress. Definitely the most beautiful dress I have ever worn or ever will wear. So,
R.I.P.
It's sad. Someone bought it though. It's all good.
Good.
So you were saying you were trying to publicly be positive about the church.
Yeah. I was trying to be positive because I felt like I must have been being too negative. And I didn't want to hurt this person. Okay. So I was being somewhat public about things, but I can see now looking back, kind of like my mission, the amount of anxiety that I was having about it, but I just didn't want to acknowledge was related to that thing. I just kind of felt like, oh, there's just a lot of life changes happening and I'm feeling anxiety. But looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, it was because I was trying to make all these things work that couldn't have worked, basically. Yeah. And uniquely, him and I, we dated and we were able to have somewhat of a normal relationship before he decided to become active again. So we were able to figure a lot of those things out.
You mean intimacy, sexual
intimacy things.
Okay.
Yeah, we were able to, do those things, which was great. But, when you add the church back into the mix, it just kind of complicates things. So somewhere along the line, we kind of decided not to do that anymore. Yeah. So that's when marriage kind of comes in and it's like, well, now we got to get married so we can do all those things and whatnot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So you're already so attached and like in love with this person by the time the church becomes a thing again. That's got to be so tough.
And it felt so painful because looking back at my, my boyfriend from high school that I loved, my senior year boyfriend, it felt like no matter what situation I was in, the church kept me from the person that I loved. When I was with him, it was that he wasn't Mormon, my first boyfriend, and that I had to leave to find someone who was. And then when I was with, my last husband, it was that he wanted to be Mormon and I couldn't be that type of a Mormon. I couldn't be enough of a Mormon. I couldn't believe or disbelieve. It had, it just felt like the church always comes back and prevents me from being with somebody that I love. So yeah, that's been extremely painful to process because it's just like a wave that keeps hitting you and you expect it to like stop at some point and it just feels like it won't stop. So when I have a lot of frustration or anger towards the church, it just feels like it's, people say, oh, why won't you leave it alone? Because it hasn't left me alone. It hasn't let me live my life or have authentic relationships. It's barred me and taken a lot from me. So yeah, it's hard to process all that loss.
What was it that made you realize you couldn't make that second marriage work and you didn't want to keep presumably trying to be something you weren't?
Yeah. So eventually in the marriage, I brought it up to him that I just couldn't believe in those things. And that was obviously really hard, but we weren't quite done then. I think we still hoped we could make it work at some level. And I think there was just a lot of tension between the fact that he believed so much and that I didn't. And he felt, hurt if I was saying something bad about the church. And I felt hurt if he was defending the church. Just kind of an ongoing situation. But I think what it really came down to was I just had realized at one point, I've really never asked myself if I want kids. I've always said, do I want kids? And then there's already the answer built in that says yes, because that's default. And I would say in society, but especially in Mormonism, it's you're a woman, you're going to have kids. That's the most important thing you're going to do. And so I had always convinced myself that I wanted to have kids. And my mom's so wonderful. She would always say, if you're going to have kids. And I would say, no, Mom, I'm going to have kids. She'd say, okay, but if you're going to have kids. And I would be like, stop saying that. But like, she's just the best. It's like that helped me so much because my mom always wanted to make sure that I knew that she was going to love me either way. And I might as well mention my mom left the church in between those two marriages as well. And yeah. And I won't talk too much about other family members because I don't know what they want to be public, but my mom's out of the church now. And so she's just such a wonderful person. So I never felt that pressure that like I had to have kids from her. And I think that I'm sure a lot of people feel that pressure from their moms, particularly. I felt it from my mother-in-law for sure. But I'm grateful that my mom didn't put that on me because I'm sure I would have felt like I have to do this if I'm going to be a good Mormon. So yeah, so I basically was like, just a weird realization. I don't know if I want kids. And that's a scary thought to have when you've told somebody that you want kids and you've talked about kids and now you feel like, oh my gosh, they're going to really feel like I've just deceived them twice, over this thing. But to be fair, I never really got to ask myself that question. So that was the main thing for us was just like, yeah, if we make all the other stuff work, I can't promise you that I want kids. And that's hard because if I was a man, I'd probably want kids more too, because you don't have to do a lot of the, labor and all of that. But, and I can't blame him too. I mean, he wants kids and that's fair. But yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, Mormonism sets you up. It stacks the cards against you in marriages to fail, because if it doesn't go exactly as it's supposed to, there's really no going outside the box. It's tough.
And as you're highlighting, there's so many questions you don't even think to ask yourself. So who can blame you for like agreeing to certain things when you didn't even know there was really another option, or it wasn't? Yeah. I love what you said about your mum and how she talked about kids though, because I think even those small language shifts can be really huge.
Definitely.
I wonder if that like enabled you to realize maybe I don't want kids sooner than you might have.
I think it did.
Yeah, and I want to reinforce a point we've made before. You grow up in Mormonism with that song, "The wise man built his house upon the rock."
Yep.
And you're taught that the rock is the gospel or the church. And something I realized 5 or 10 years ago is the Mormon church is not a solid rock to build a marriage or a relationship or a life on. Not because there aren't good things about it. I do believe there are good things about Mormonism, but if you are to think that you're going to have kids and that your kids are going to stay in the church, or you're going to get married and that your spouse is going to stay in the church, or you're going to get a job where your clients are, always going to be okay with whatever religious choices you make, there are so many ways where betting your life on your or other people's Mormon church activity is a really bad bet.
Yes.
Like any parent right now raising their kids Mormon, guaranteed on average, over 50% of your kids will not be Mormon by the time they're 30. And so you're setting yourself up for sad heaven where you think you're building an eternal family, but there's a really good chance your spouse and or the majority of your kids are going to leave the church if you don't.
Yeah.
And so that's why this is so serious, because your education or lack thereof was tied to what the church influenced and taught you to follow or not value. Your marriage, your 2 marriages, whether or not what if you had rushed and had 2 or 3 or 4 kids and then all this happened. And then it's not just you, it's not just your spouse or your spouses. It's not just the disappointment of all your friends and family, but then it's also the kids being involved. And that's why this question of informed consent is so essential, and why the church is so derelict and irresponsible in 2021 to not make sure that every single Mormon or Mormon investigator fully understands what they're getting into before they sign up for a lifetime commitment to your mission service and eternal marriage and the kids and 10% of their income for life.
Yep. And that's the goal.
Then who's going to sign up?
Well,
I would argue that it depends on them not.
Some will.
Informed consent, but why? Who? I mean, community is a big pull, but why would anyone be drawn to an LDS community if there was genuine informed consent where they're like, hey, this is the history of our church, this is like what we're built on, and this is the truth, this is what we actually know about those things. I
mean, that's the rub, because a lot less people are probably going to join.
Yeah.
But I'll say 2 things. One, John Hamer joined Community of Christ knowing all the problems with Community of Christ. I mean, it happens. And all sorts of people believe all sorts of weird things, we realize in 2021. And I don't mean to be offensive to Mormons. Odd things, difficult things, conspiratorial things, magical thinking things. I mean, people believe all sorts of weird things, but I think obviously the point I'm trying to make is how deeply unethical it is for the church to allow any Mormon to go one more minute without knowing everything relevant about the church's history and the way it harms people.
Yeah.
And it's deeply unethical for the Mormon church to baptize one more person without them fully understanding. You know, there are African Americans or Africans converting to the church, never even knowing that the church banned people of color for 150 years.
Yeah.
Like deeply unethical. I think.
I think they're
Am
really
I soapboxing, Samantha?
No, you're right. You're right.
I
I think
agree.
they're really going to go for that suggestion. I think that would,
Yeah.
Sarcasm alert.
Put it in the suggestion box. Yeah. I completely agree. It just feels like you make a lot of choices under false pretenses. And then you're like, wait, I wish I could have made different choices, but it's too late. And I feel lucky that I'm, 28 and I realize these things. I'm not in my 50s, 60s. And not to say that that's bad, but there's just so much more life taken from you when you realize it later. So I feel really fortunate, but you still can't get back anything you lost. So it's hard to come to terms with.
Do you think about how the experience of like buying fully into this worldview and then having it completely destroyed benefits you moving forward in your life?
Wait, we're going to her future? Are you saying going forward?
I mean,
Are you asking
it's
if
just
she's gonna consider staying?
No.
staying engaged?
I'm just, you're talking about the time that you obviously feel like you lose to Mormonism, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I often feel like the experience of having this worldview that you buy into so completely and then having it all crash down around you is kind of a beneficial experience that like not everyone in the world gets to have. You seem like you've always been so good at being open-minded, even despite being in a high demand religion. But do you feel like benefits there?
No, I do. And I think...
and having been through it all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I completely feel that way.
misunderstood
It's kind of like when you go through a hard thing and you wish it didn't happen, but it did. So all you can do is move forward. And obviously there's still a lot of healing that has to happen, emotions that I wasn't able to process that have to happen. But I do feel like it sets me up for success for the rest of my life. Not to say I won't have things that I fail on and whatever, but I also won't feel guilt for failing, and I'll feel more open to trying and thinking more and asking more questions. Just an overall level of happiness that it's real, like everything's at least real. So yeah, I do feel like I do walk away with some benefits. I think some people, because they don't have that experience, you kind of just do fall through life and then it's over and you're like, oh, what did I do? And I don't feel like I have to do that because I already know what it's like to feel like a zombie for a certain period of time and then get to break free of that. So yeah, it's almost like a reverse.
And I feel like so many people betray themselves throughout their lives, like inside or outside of religion. Mm-hmm. And you've had such an extreme, like 20-something year boot camp of self-betrayal that hopefully that means that now moving forward you can... Yeah. Sorry, I'm like getting on my life
good.
coach soapbox.
I like it. And I think, I mean, it's not really backtracky, but starting my TikTok while I was in that second marriage, that as an outlet for me has been, and it sounds so like silly, it's TikTok.
No.
It's like a children's app, but it's been so wonderful for me just to be, I guess what I wished I would have had when I was going through it, just being an example, not example, I guess, but just, even if it's just like a silly TikTok that somebody can laugh at, and then it feels like it has less power over them, that Mormon belief or that whatever it was that they struggled with, then I feel great about that. And I feel like moving forward and having TikTok, it just feels like I can be more authentic to myself finally. I can express feelings or thoughts that I was never able to previously in my life. And I mentioned this a little bit, but sometimes on TikTok, people say, oh, exMormons, you just want people to follow you, and how are you any different than, the guy you hate, Joseph Smith? And obviously people can follow me on TikTok, but I don't want to be like a leader. I don't want to be that voice for anybody. I want to encourage people to have their own voices. I want people to follow themselves and to ask themselves what they need in their lives, because I'm happy being a friend and a listening ear, but, everyone out there, they're wonderful people and they should trust themselves. So that's my goal, is helping people feel less alone. Because once again, the church does not provide any of those types of resources. And in most cases, you're penalized if you try to. So yeah, there I am.
Yeah. So you ended that second marriage. How long ago?
Pretty recently. I think it's only been a few months.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how are you feeling now?
You know, it's still hard. It's still difficult. But
you loved him, right?
Yeah, definitely. He's a huge part of my life.
If he had just said, I'm done with the church, I'm out, and I love you whether or not you want to have kids, if he had said that,
I think there would have been, obviously, like any marriage, you have stuff that you still need to work on, but it's hard to even, I guess, comprehend what that would have looked like, because that never seemed like a possibility.
Okay.
But yeah, it was mutual in the sense that we both agreed, yeah, if I don't want kids, or if I don't know I want kids and you do, then you deserve to be able to find somebody who does. So we parted mutually on those terms, but yeah, it still feels like the church obviously plays a pretty big role in how we feel.
Okay.
So, but yeah.
So you were going to say how you're feeling now.
Now, you know, every day is a little bit different, but overall, I'm just feeling, I guess, proud of myself to do hard things, which sounds silly, but it's hard to look at your second marriage with a person that you love and realize it's not going to work out. That's super hard. So, I mean, for a while I was thinking, you know, you don't want to leave the second marriage because you're worried of what everyone's going to say. You know, a second marriage by 28, that's pretty dramatic. And if I was anybody else, I would think it was pretty insane that someone had gone through this.
There's kind of a scarlet letter. It's like, whoa, not only did one marriage fail, two.
Yeah.
So I don't believe this at all, by the way.
Oh, don't.
Second marriages on a rebound that fail pretty quickly. Super normal. Both my parents got married, second marriages, and those ended within 2 years. Yeah. So, you know, that's just, I think that's kind of quite normal.
Yeah.
Because marriage is hard and second marriages are actually harder.
Yes.
But there's that stigma of like, oh, you couldn't make it once. Now you can make it work twice.
Yeah.
There must be something wrong with you now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're just knowing that you're going to have to embrace all the judgment that people are going to have for what you've done and thinking you're stupid. But I think if anything from this like Mormon journey that I've gained is I don't really care what anybody thinks. I don't care if anybody thinks I'm stupid or naive or whatever. Like I've probably been all of those things at different points of my life. And that's okay. I'm just a human person trying to figure it out just like they are. So yeah, I just don't really care what anybody thinks. And it feels freeing for the first time in my life to not care. Like in an empathetic, caring way, I care if people are okay and things like that. But I just don't care if people disagree with the way I do things or how I see things. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't keep me up like it used to. So
what would you say to someone, because I imagine this would be a big thing, so there's stigma around divorce, but there's arguably more stigma around multiple divorces because, you know, people like characterize you by it. But what would you say to someone who's in like a second or third or fourth marriage and is like feeling like it's not aligned with what they truly want, but is feeling the pressure of that stigma?
That's a good question because a lot of it can depend on what the marriage looks like. I mean, obviously there's things that you can do to probably save a marriage in some cases. And then there's some that it's just beyond you, or it might not be what you wanted and you're a different person. But I would just, once again, ask yourself, what do I really want? Am I happy? What's going to be the best thing for me? And even if that thing is going to be really hard, do it. I mean, it's going to suck the entire time, but eventually you'll look back and be like, what if I hadn't done this? Like I needed to do this. So I always have to remind myself, this isn't forever. This feeling isn't forever, and I'm going to be okay. That's got me through a lot of tough times. Mm-hmm. So if that's anybody out there, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a tough thing. So.
Well, you seem really resilient, and I'm really impressed that you're kind of, it's like a third chapter.
Yeah.
You know, or fourth or whatever. You're just kind of like, okay, what's next?
Yep.
Life?
Yep. You just learn to roll with it. Even if it's painful, you're just kind of like, all right.
Bring it.
Yeah. I've gone this far. So.
And by the way, marriage can be amazing, but marriage is super hard. And it's super duper hard when you're not really loving and sharing values with who you're married to. So as hard as marriage is,
even if you love
being
them.
married in the wrong situation, not
tough.
healthy.
Nope.
Yeah.
So you got to do what's best for both people.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's really tough, but yeah. And so now I don't want to use the word free because I don't want it to seem like I'm free of him or anything. It's not like that, but I finally just feel like I'm free to be myself, and kind of like that period of time I had before when I was in between the two marriages to kind of figure myself out and take the time and become my own person and just do a lot of the healing that I couldn't do when I was in my marriages. So it's like time to be good selfish. Yeah.
Self-centered in a good way.
Yep. Get rid of that codependency.
And heal.
Imagine.
Yes.
What are the chances you will marry another believing Mormon man?
Ooh,
Zero.
plot twist.
What?
Zero.
Zero?
Zero.
Never
Love
say
can
never,
be
Chandler.
Love can be powerful.
Love
Those
is a drug.
chemicals in the brain.
I thought that the first or the second time.
You have a period of sobriety from a drug, and then you're like, I'm good. I can
Yeah,
have
I
a
can
little
try
bit
it.
again. Boom, you're married again.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, we got her on record. So
Yeah.
you know,
Play that for me again if you ever find out otherwise.
we'll make a
'cause
TikTok out of that one.
Please do. Tag me immediately. But yeah, I would definitely say never again. And not just because it can't be a good person, but there's just so much more than, like we're saying, even if you love someone so much, those beliefs are bigger than any marriage, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's I just would never put myself through that again because it's very painful to feel chosen over religion or chosen after religion.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so I have to ask you a question I'm asking a lot of people lately. I have a certain set of listeners. There's a group that are like evangelical Christian, and they always write, either commenting on YouTube or they write to me, it's just so, John, I love your podcast, but it's just so terrible that Mormonism ruins people for God, or they ruin people for Christianity. And they're really sad when post-Mormons don't continue being Christians. So, and then I've got another set of friends that are like, hey, organized religion, even if it's not true per se, it's still good. And so the myth is good and the community is good and the values are good. And so it's a shame that Mormonism ruins people for like progressive religion, even if it's Buddhism or, Judaism or whatever, because they're like, that's still good. And having neither of those is like sad. And so what would you say to kind of both of those concerns? Well, I mean, where do you want to talk about where you stand with God and Jesus right now?
Sure. And
respond to those who might be concerned regarding your state with Jesus, basically.
Yeah. So, and going off those points first, I mean, I remember when I first left and it was somewhat public, those people flooded my DMs for sure. Like, oh, I'm sorry that God was ruined for you. I promise it's all good. And I respect that they feel that way. But at least being someone who went through Mormonism, if Mormonism wasn't it, I just don't like, it was so high stakes. There were so many wonderful things promised to me. And if that wasn't it just, everything's kind of the same to me. And I know that's like a broad stroke, but to me, it's just, they all look the same. And I don't mean to be offensive by saying that.
So Mormonism did ruin you for Christianity and
sure.
God.
For sure. All religion. It's
religion.
not for me.
Okay.
Yeah. God too, though.
God too?
Yes.
So the Mormon church ruined God for you?
Yes, for sure.
Well, I mean, I guess you lived 25 years with God kind of abandoning you.
Silent. And where was Heavenly Mother? Like that was to me so bothered. Like I always just wanted to know where I could see myself in the church. And obviously there's not a lot of women figures. But I hated that Heavenly Mother was just shielded. It was like, oh, she's not, people would attack her, so we can't make her public, and she's being defended. But I thought if Heavenly Mother would be able to defend herself, surely. So I just feel like, Mormonism definitely deleted God for me.
But okay, I'm just going to push back a tiny bit.
Please do.
So why not give God a second chance? Figure out how other people experience God and try that.
So luckily growing up where I grew up in Vancouver, Washington, I had so many friends that were not LDS. I would say the majority of my friends were not LDS. And although I always felt like I had the right church, I went to churches a lot with my other friends so that they would come to mine. And I honestly was never not open to it. Like I wanted to confirm to myself probably that, oh, I was right, but I would go into it hoping I could feel something there too. And I just never did. But I don't really care what God it is, whether it's Christian God or Mormon God or whatever. Whatever God it was left me alone time and time again. So whoever it is, that's wrong. I just can't imagine believing in that type of a God.
So non-Mormon God could have answered those prayers.
Whatever
and
God, yeah.
That God didn't either.
Yep. There was just
so
nobody.
You're still holding God accountable.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with, people tell you, oh, they see my TikToks and say, oh, you're going to hell, or I can't wait to see you go to hell. And I go to the celestial kingdom and say I told you so. Weird comment, but I get those things.
That sounds like a celestial kingdom mindset to me.
It's fun. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's not where they're going. But yeah, so I get those comments and it's like, why would I want to believe in a God that, to me, the idea of God is monstrous. I mean, a God that makes hell and then makes people who don't do perfectly in life go to hell, non-believers or sinners or whatever. The idea of God is just crazy to me now. It just doesn't work for me. And so, yeah, I guess that's where I am with my belief is I don't believe in a God. I don't believe in Jesus. I'm not, I don't know if I would say I'm atheist because I'm kind of just open to whatever there is in life. But weirdly enough, have you watched that documentary? It's called Hail Satan.
No, not yet.
Yep. It's about the Church of Satan.
Yes, you
but
would love
not
it.
about worshiping Satan.
No, it's very different than people think.
It's about a secular way of life.
Yeah.
That is basically shining a spotlight on the abuses of religion. Is that right?
They kind of serve. They're more almost of a political movement too, but they kind of try to balance out that Christianity seems to be the default in America. And if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend watching the documentary.
We'll add it in the show notes.
It to me, not that I would say I would be a part of that church because I don't think I'll ever be a part of any church. But since watching that documentary, I would associate myself more with the things that they believe than I ever believed in Mormon Christianity, basically. They're simple and wonderful people. And it was pointed out to me, or I guess in the documentary a couple of times, that there's so many times that, this idea of Satan, where he's told that Satan's the bad guy, actually was kind of the good guy. I mean, if you look like Adam and Eve, the temptation for Eve to eat the fruit, it was Satan, and he was the one that encouraged her to do that, and she had to do that. So Satan was there in the same time as when Christ is fasting, for 30 days, and then Satan tempts him. Technically, it's like him saying, "You don't have to do this." And when I had my patriarchal blessing mention Satan originally, like I said, I was kind of offended by it. And then I started to really think about it a lot as I got older and as I left Mormonism. And Satan was always agency. And, they teach you that, you sit in a chair and they say, this was Satan's plan. And then they say, and here was God's plan. It was to come here and make your own choices. But it feels backwards. That feels like the opposite of what it actually is, because Satan was the one that always wanted agency. And not that I believe in Satan, but I guess symbolically. So I think that I finally came to peace just knowing, even if none of it's true, that Satan figure wasn't a bad thing in my life. It was actually the voice of reason. And that having a conscience is a good thing. So I don't want to say I believe in Satan, but yeah, I don't really believe in anything.
But hail Satan.
Yeah.
Sorry, John.
No, I don't I don't associate with anything. I'm just, the more I know, the less I know, basically. So.
Yeah. The Church of Satan is basically secular humanism, manufacturing a belief in a magical, mystical, supernatural being so that they can minimize the civic influence of Christianity and religious institutions.
Yep.
Is that fair?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
It's brilliant. And it's interesting, and it has nothing to do with killing and eating babies.
Not even, and they get into that in the documentary. They're just not who people think they are, but they're kind of trolls, they kind of like trolls. To troll people, and I think it's funny, but I just like what they stand for, and I don't believe in much in anything, and just doing the best that I can with the life I know I have. So it's kind of simple, but works for me.
Okay, so I'm still going to ask this follow-up question. What about, like, I've got a friend who's Jewish.
Oh.
I hope he hears this. He barely believes in God. Like, he's like 51% there's a God, 49% there's not. He probably doesn't go to synagogue at all, but he bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah his children.
Right.
And he associates with Judaism as a tribe and as a culture. And he thinks it's a great way to raise your kids and just a good way of life. And scriptures are nothing more than metaphor and myth. And there's a little bit of potential historical credibility to the Bible or the Torah or the Talmud, but really it's just myth. But he feels very strongly that that's possibly the ideal way of living. He would hate me saying that. But I really do get the sense that he thinks of like people not being religious, like he would look at a puppy, just kind of like, oh, I'm so sorry for you.
So empty.
Yeah. So why not just be a really non-literal progressive religious person, have your cake and eat it too, where you're like, yeah, find a guy or whatever, woman, whatever, to partner up with who is just Mormon socially and says all the right things, but you both wink at each other and know that you don't believe any of it, but you can have your cake and eat it too. You can totally get all the social benefits of participation, of tribal stuff, of not turning anyone off, and you can believe what they can do whatever you want. Buffet Mormons, basically.
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, just for me personally, it doesn't work because I think this is a Brene Brown thing, but there's a difference between fitting in and belonging. And I did a really good job at fitting in for a really long time, and it worked. And I was happy on a surface level, but I didn't feel like I belonged. I couldn't go in there and say, hey, I'm having this really, really serious issue, if it was something contrary to what those people believed. So did those people really love me, or did they just like that I reaffirmed what they already believe and made them feel more comfortable? So at least for me, I don't want to have to pretend to be anything I'm not. I spent a long time doing that, and I want to be exactly who I am, and I want to be comfortable with people not liking it. And if people will be offended if I think differently, that's okay. They have every right to. But being authentic to myself means making choices for myself. And I just don't think, even on a surface level, that religions give you that option. I think that most religions don't give you that option.
So in my conversation with my friend, I'm like, you tell me what to tell ex-Mormons, because like, they're not going to become Catholics.
Yeah.
They're not going to join Judaism.
No?
The Old Testament can be as problematic more than the New Testament. They're not going to join Lutheranism. Like what? I become Baptist. And he's like, well, Unitarian Universalist, you don't, that's a church and you don't have to believe anything, or Community of Christ, because they don't care what you believe.
Why does it need to be a church at all? Why can't you just find community outside of religion?
Well, that's his point. And I'm basically just speaking to my friend Ken. I'm like, come on, bro. I'm doing my best here, but I'm just trying to voice his argument that he believes that having a morality, like he would say, for example, premarital sex is bad. He would say that, drug and alcohol culture is bad, that party, frat and sorority culture is bad, and that traditional families are good. And he would say that some sort of esoteric, non-literal belief in a higher power is good, and that having a framework or a structure to kind of order your life and to potentially order your family and to have the tribal and the ritualistic benefits of a religious tradition are all good. And by the way, he's not alone. There are a lot of Mormons today, Dan Witherspoon, maybe even Patrick Mason or others, Fiona Givens, that seem to be advocating this sort of approach.
Yeah. So
that's Samantha. That's why.
No, I have no issue with that. I mean, I do think we kind of deconstruct our reality by degrees, not to say that everyone needs to arrive at some specific point that I believe in, but the thing you just said, like there is still a massive array of beliefs involved in what you just said. Like, you can, if you just are talking about community, you don't need religion. If you're just talking about a sense of shared values and ethics, you don't need religion.
Spirituality.
you don't need religion for spirituality. We've done a whole panel on it. Like
Really?
you love Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle talks highly of Jesus and the Buddha, and a lot of the original spiritual leaders of these groups like weren't necessarily gunning for what the religion turned into.
What about sexual debauchery and drug addiction and alcohol addiction?
Well, sorry, I don't want to make this about
No,
me,
you're not.
but
You're
like
good.
the root of addiction is like lack of connection and often unhealed pain. And you can absolutely have a glass of wine and not become addicted to alcohol. So it's like if you personally feel like you have a predisposition to get, you don't trust yourself, then you don't trust yourself. Don't do it. You don't have to do anything. But I think we should be very careful of the ways that we are prescriptive and that we put what we think is right onto others. It's like maybe for you, like a heteronormative family structure, you believe that's great. Maybe for you, you believe that it's not important to figure out sexual compatibility before marriage. But like, though, you have to, I think, getting on my soapbox, but I think like, for me personally, the wisest form of spirituality has been being able to create separation between my beliefs and reality and recognizing that like those things are beliefs, like,
Yeah.
and you can't, and trying to prescribe your beliefs to others. I mean, you're free to talk about what you think is good and what's benefited you, but why do you feel like nobody should have sex before marriage? Like, is there some lingering conditioning there around religion? Because, you still can't get away from the fact that like you did have that belief instilled in you from like X to X. And like, there are plenty of people who didn't, who have like very healthy relationships with sexuality. And, there's not necessarily I would argue that open-mindedness is generally, I don't know. I don't want to cut me off.
No,
All right.
you're good. And
Delete all that.
What would you add, Chandler, to what
I
Nancy said?
I think, yeah, I
Or
have.
disagree. You can disagree.
No, I mean, I have friends, I have people that, go on to join other churches and other belief systems and things like that. And that's totally fine because everyone's so different and that's what everyone should get to do. And when they know all the conditions, being able to make a decision, what's going to make their life the best, then that's great. But I also think there has to be some type of correlation with how much people have lost while part of a high demand religion and their interest in still going to another religion. Because I think when you get burned so badly, it just kind of reminds me of an abusive relationship where like, why would you go back just to get burned again? And some people who maybe had more of, not like a lukewarm in a bad way, but like a lukewarm experience with a religion, they might feel more comfortable staying in that thing because it always served them. So at least for me, the hurt that it caused me throughout my life, I just would never entertain that idea again. But if somebody likes that way of living, then they have every right to do that thing. I think it's just kind of like you were saying, it's just people need to be willing to not project what they think is the right thing and moral onto other people and accept that everyone has the right to make choices for themselves. And just because you believe it doesn't mean it is right for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's why Buddhism is the truest religion.
Yeah. So
Well,
that's,
Well, cool. Well, well said. Very powerful.
Thank you.
And I look forward to hearing from my friends. Doing my best to advocate for you. Yeah. So, well, that's beautiful and powerful. And what a beautiful way to kind of start to close up. So any other things about your story or any other final lessons or things you want to share? I mean, you could argue that same logic about you never wanting to join a religion again. You could say maybe you never want to ever get married again or never want to even be in love again or have a significant partner again.
Never love again.
That logic could apply.
Yeah, it totally could apply. I think in most things in life, I'm still open to kind of whatever, but religion feels like my own clinical trial where time and time again, it was proven not to work. And so it would be silly of me when there's more evidence against it than for it. But I just think that I'm open to other things, but religion just didn't work for me.
But I mean, will you ever love again?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Will you ever love again,
I
Chandler?
will.
No, but after
I
two
will.
divorces, someone might say, you know, why try?
Yeah.
It could be a third divorce.
Oh, totally. And that's terrifying for me. I mean, I know that if I ever get into another relationship, I'd want to be dating that person for quite a long period of time before the conversation of marriage would ever come up, if it comes up. But yeah, I'll definitely love again. I think that maybe that is one of the things that I've gained a strength from Mormonism is even though I've got knocked down a million times, I feel like, all right, you just get back up again and you keep trying. And I feel like love is one of the greatest things there is. And it's one of the greatest things I've been able to experience. So I'll fight for that forever. I mean, that's the best thing there is.
That's kind of beautiful.
Thank you. But yeah, so I will love again.
You will. My mom's been divorced twice and now she has a very nice boyfriend and
There you
she's in
go.
her 60s.
See, it's possible.
My mom got married 3 times and the love of her life died at age 93. And I don't think she'll get married again, but they were married for, I don't know, 27, 30, 33 years, something like that.
That's wonderful.
My dad is married to his 5th spouse, but he loves his current spouse dearly. And they're, by all appearances and accounts, super happy together. And
Good.
there were just a couple rebound things that happened. But other than that, my dad had 3 really important relationships in his life. What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
He doesn't
worth
like
it.
me saying that, though. He doesn't.
He sounds like a cool guy.
Yeah, I see.
My dad is a super, hey, Dad. My dad's probably not listening, but Dad, I love you. You're good.
Also, I think just a note about the divorce thing. I think it's maybe this is obvious, but it's wrong to see divorce as a failure. Right. Like none of us know nearly as much about relationships and making marriages or long-term committed relationships work as kind of like cultural expectations would have us believe. And I think you can't choose the timeline on which you learn lessons, and we have to play out whatever things we have to play out until our psyches realize this doesn't work for us anymore. And if that means 12 marriages, like that's okay. Like life isn't about like finding this one. I mean, maybe for some people it is, but in my mind, it's not about finding this one person and just sticking it out to the end. Like life is everything you live in your life. And I think viewing relationships and staying together through the lens of success failure is really problematic. And really what we need to be putting the focus on more and more is making sure we're not like self-betraying and that we're not betraying ourselves to fit ourselves into these roles that our relationship structures demand that we fit into, otherwise they fall apart, because that is a sandy foundation to me. Mm-hmm. And you can have an unmarried couple that is like has a much stronger foundation, as we all know. Mm-hmm. Like being married doesn't inherently mean anything about the strength of a relationship.
Yep. I think it's just pulling away from that idea. Being in a high demand religion also is just the emphasis on marriage being everything and the fix all, and that's where everything goes right. It's just realizing that it's not everything. It can be wonderful, but it's not all you are, and it doesn't mean you're a failure if you couldn't do it right, because plenty of people can't do it right, and it doesn't mean they're bad. It just means people are people.
And even outside of Mormonism, like our society in general encourages codependent relationships.
Mm-hmm.
The metaphor you gave me when I got divorced is like if you're both leaning on each other and then one of you falls down, you both fall down. But
You
if you can have
remember
two,
that.
Yeah, I say it to everyone. But if you can have 2 whole people showing up, then that's so much better. And if you like Tanner, he just had a breakup, and the person he broke up with, like they're on amazing terms. And they just realized like we had this beautiful year together, and now he won't mind me saying this, and now it's time to move on. And I think that's lovely. And it's such a like evolved way of looking at relationships. Like it's such a conscious way of looking at relationships as, you know, enjoy your time together. And it doesn't need to last forever to be just as meaningful and valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Sorry I said so much.
Oh,
No, I appreciate it.
it's why you're here.
I just love divorce.
Well, Chandler, this has been amazing. This has exceeded my already super high expectations. Is there any final thing about your story you want to share? Or, I mean, what's your TikTok handle so that people can follow you on TikTok?
It's just Chan Roberson. So just Chan and then my last name.
No
So
hyphen or
just
underscore?
the @, and that's it. Yeah.
At Chan Roberson?
At Chan Roberson. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's that
And
simple.
any other things you want to share about your story, or just final thoughts or feelings?
I guess final thoughts. I mean, at least for me, listening to your podcast and Mormon stories a lot, I would always hear people's, extraordinary, amazing, crazy stories. And I would compare it, I guess, to my story a little bit and just think, oh, those stories are so amazing and interesting. And my story is just so average. And I think that a lot of people probably feel that way about their experience through Mormonism, that, who are they? What is their experience? But I hope everybody would know that their experience is amazing and beautiful and tragic and wonderful. And just because you didn't meet general authorities or you don't have some super influential story that's going to change the world, it still mattered and your experience was still valid and your story is still very important. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's powerful.
So that's about all I would say.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Samantha, any final, I want to give you a chance to plug your coaching practice and also Zelf. Any final thoughts you want to share? It's been so lovely to have you today. And thanks for bringing Chandler on the podcast.
Yeah, I swear you messaged me about bringing Chandler on the podcast, but
Maybe I did.
anyway.
Anyway.
No, I don't really have any final thoughts. I feel like it's been a really beautiful episode. I liked what you said at the end. Yours is a sort of typical Mormon story, and every typical Mormon story is like beautiful and tragic, and just kind of contains all of it.
Yeah.
Unexpected hero of the episode, Chandler's Christian high school boyfriend. Big fan of him.
Skylar.
And also I do coaching if anyone's going through a religious transition or a life transition such as divorce.
How do they reach out to you?
I prefer for people to reach out through my personal Instagram account, the Samspo, in my DMs.
That's TheSamspo.
Mm-hmm. You can just type my name in, Samantha Shelley, and find it.
Samantha Shelley. Shelley.
I love the spelling out in the podcast, John. When the description box is right there.
All right. Sorry for helping you. Anyway, people close to me have worked with Samantha and had really good experiences. So I can give Samantha a thumbs up. Is there any chance, Kara willing, that you come back and co-host? Maybe with Kara. Maybe you can co-host with Kara and I'm not even in the picture.
Do it.
I think send your requests to patreon.com/self-on-the-shelf. No, yeah, I'd love to come back. I love Mormon stories. This has been really fun.
Yeah.
I love listening to people's stories. It's like the most interesting thing to do in the world. You have a good job.
We kind of have a cool job.
Yeah. This is awesome.
Kara's always like, I have the best job in the world.
She is. She loves her job.
All right. Well, thank you, Samantha. And shout out to Tanner and check out Zelf on the Shelf. It's an amazing YouTube channel. They also do TikTok and Instagram, and they've got a Patreon. And amazing. All right.
Okay.
Well, I'll just say thanks to everyone who joined us on the live stream. We really appreciate anyone when you do super chats on the live stream and you click the $sign. Those donations help pay for Samantha co-hosting, or Kara, or Gerardo with cinematography, or me, or Brooklyn who does editing, and the studio, and all the expenses that go into running a nonprofit. So thanks to everyone who donates and supports Mormon Stories of the Open Stories Foundation. We couldn't do this without you. And we lose 10 to 20 recurring donors a month because either financial hardship, or people lose interest, or people don't like that I've made changes sometimes. And we're always having to hustle and recruit new donors to replace old ones. So if you can't afford to donate to Mormon Stories, don't feel a cent of guilt. Just enjoy it. We give it away for free because that's what we want. And if you are in a position to support Mormon Stories Podcast and the Open Stories Foundation, please do. You can go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, or the link in the description of this YouTube episode, or even on your podcast app. Click on the donate button at Mormon Stories at the top of the page. Sign up for a monthly donation, whatever you can afford. You can know that your donations are tax deductible in the U.S., that we're 100% transparent in our finances, and that 100% of your donations will go towards the mission of the Open Stories Foundation, which is providing full informed consent to both Mormons and prospective Mormons, and to supporting Mormons in faith crisis, and to supporting healing and growth in community for people who end up leaving Mormonism. I think those are all worthy causes. And I will do this job until I'm 75 years old, which is in another 23 years, as long as you are willing to support. And we'll keep bringing on amazing co-hosts and grow our organization to help and reach even more people, as long as you're willing to support us. So please support us if you can. And there are other ways to support us: positive reviews on our Facebook page, positive reviews on the Apple Podcast app, subscribing to us across TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, liking our stuff, commenting on our stuff, sharing it with the world. All of those things help us as well. So thanks for your support. Be good to each other, be kind to each other. And most importantly, stay tuned for another episode of Mormon Stories podcast. Bye, everybody. Take care. Thanks again, Chandler.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha.